Well, welcome to a special edition of ATG Live. We're part of the SSW network. I'm Pete Fletzer. I'm joined, as I always am, by my good friend and co-host Nick Mielke. Nick, how you doing, my friend?
I am super excited to be a part of this conversation. This is something that you and I have talked about for a lot of time, a long time. It's something that comes up in a lot of our weekly discussions because Star Wars is this interconnected universe or galaxy, if you will. And these ideas of how do these movies connect? How do we look at these movies now? Several of them have been out for a decently extended period of time. This is a conversation I've been looking forward to for a really long time. So I'm doing fantastic and I can't wait to get into it.
That's awesome. Well, tonight we are talking about the good, the bad, and the controversy. And we're going to be digging into the Star Wars sequels, as Nick alluded to. You know, we have been a little bit on hiatus with the podcast of late. So what we're doing tonight is we're recording a podcast, and we've invited the world to come and hang out with us while we do this. And this podcast is going to dig into just the full and honest look at the sequels. You know, I think we find a lot of times that we end up sort of guarding our position simply because it's not worth the hassle and headache of online. But tonight we're going to dig into it. You know, as Nick, as you said, you know, I often say on ATG Live, I have special feelings about the the Rise of Skywalker. I'm going to share them tonight. I'm going to dig into some of my issues with it.
Matthew is in the chat. He said, "I'm ready for Pete to give his R-rated Tross review."
It would be R-rated. Well, there may be an F-bomb or two, but I'll do my best to keep it family friendly. But
and we're going to involve the chat as well. We want to hear from you guys. We want to hear your thoughts about these movies, the feelings that you have. For me, you know, TW's on it. I've got the shill shirt on because what other shirt are you going to wear when you're talking about the sequel trilogy movies than a shill shirt? Because if you like anything in Star Wars or really anything in the world at all, you're considered a shill. Pete's camera is having some issues, so we've lost him for a minute. I think I can hear you, though. Are you still there?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but your camera is currently thinking about whether it wants to come back on or not.
There's some weird thing going on here with my phone. I don't know what's happening. So I do use my phone for my camera. So now, look at that. You're going to get the full view.
This. Look at this. Peek behind the covers.
We did say
covers,
that we're working through. There we go.
There he is.
Got it back.
Is Captain Rex in Return of the Jedi, looking as ever.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. So what were you just saying? I totally missed it because I was trying to figure out why somebody would call me at this.
I was simply saying that if I'm going to wear a shirt where we talk about the sequel trilogy, it is going to be the shill shirt because TW said shill. Yeah.
Yep. For sure.
But this is a conversation that I think is absolutely worth having. I think that, like I said, it's woven through a lot of our conversations in recent years, not only relating to Disney Plus, Disney shows, the buyout.
And now you just muted.
I know, my Alexa came on and I had to tell her to be quiet. We're having a moment.
Hey, this is what happens. We normally do it at 8 o'clock. By normally
8 o'clock on a Thursday, not 6 o'clock on a Tuesday. Work with us, people.
My goodness, the Force is we're drifting. You know what it is?
The Force is strong.
I believe it's because we're shills. Lucasfilm is like, you guys are not going to say anything negative about the sequels.
They're going to take us down.
We're being taken offline. In the voice is coming from inside the house. No, it's so. But it is true. I mean, we do tend to be, you know, and that's one of the things that's really important to keep in mind about the podcast and about what we do, is we do keep things very positive, right? We don't get sucked into the negativity and the toxicity, but we fight against it and we call it out, which is what I think makes it difficult sometimes for us to have these very real and very open conversations about the sequels, because as great as they are, there are also things that are worth discussing that may or may not be as good, right? And we've wanted that open opportunity to have that conversation. So as I was saying before, this is normally a podcast. Well, not normally a podcast. ATG Live is our live Thursday night show. So if you're joining us for the first time, make sure to come back on Thursday night. We do the news, we do conversation, we do some deep dives, but this is a little bit of a different type of show for us. Make sure to subscribe to Around the Galaxy wherever you get your podcast, because that's where this is going to go. And there's going to be a lot more stuff coming into the podcast stream in the very near future. But Nick, this is a judgment-free zone tonight. We are not, we're taking off the gloves a little bit, but we're also, I think it's important to note that there's no venom intended with any of the comments that may or may not come out over the next couple.
That's right.
Hours.
We are the Planet Fitness of Star Wars sequel trilogy conversations. We're not going to judge you. We're not going to gatekeep. We're going to share our feelings about these movies.
Right.
But just because I feel one way and Pete feels another way and one of you feels another way doesn't mean that any of us are wrong or right. It simply means that's what art is. That's what critique is, and the ability to look at something. And the thing you will notice is as we go through this night and as we have these conversations, it's not going to be gatekeeping. It's not going to be assholery, if you will.
Right.
It's simply going to be our personal feelings on these three movies that make up the Skywalker saga.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, these conversations have been had before. There's 1,000 podcasts that have said what was everything wrong with the sequel trilogy or everything great about the sequel trilogy. But this is just our perspective. This is two Gen Xers who have been Star Wars fans for life and are revisiting the sequels because they have changed everything about Star Wars, looking backwards and looking forward, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But Nick, first, maybe tell, for people who are new and joining us for the first time or listening to this as a podcast for the first time, maybe give us a little bit the short version of your sort of Star Wars story. And you're muted.
This is how it's going to go. And that's the other thing with this show tonight. We're not in our usual spot. We're only a tiny bit off our game, so it's going to be a little bit loose, but that's going to be fun. We want to
be a bitch to edit. I don't mind telling you that right now.
That's Pete's problem. Yes, born in 1978, so just right behind when Star Wars first came out. Grew up with it. There has literally not been a time in my life where I did not have Star Wars. The first Star Wars that I remember seeing in the movie theater, I saw Return of the Jedi at a drive-in movie theater in Central Illinois, where I lived at the time, in my parents' station wagon. The other movies that I watched were on recorded Betamax tapes that my dad recorded off HBO, and I absolutely wore those tapes out. So
you were the guy that had Betamax.
I was that guy. My dad, fun fact, my dad is one of the luckiest win radio contest guys. Even now, wins tickets to concerts and baseball games and all this kind of crap. When I was a kid, he won a year's supply of Betamax videotapes from a radio station contest that were blank, and they came in like a case. And I think it was I don't know what constituted a year's worth of Betamax, but he won 30 or 40 blank VHS or Betamax tapes. So Star Wars. Been around my entire life, grew up with it, went through the quote unquote dark times, read all the books in middle school, went to college, special editions came out, prequels came out when I was in college, and then, just continued forward from there. So it has always been a part of my life. Star Wars and Indiana Jones. Those were the two things that I've always been obsessed with and have kind of dictated a lot of the entertainment aspects of my life.
And it's important. The reason I'm bringing this up, and I'll share my story in just a second as well, but it's going to be very important to understand where we come from as fans as we look at the sequels, because a lot of fans, because there is that broad range of fandom, whether it's the OG, OT folks like us, sequel trilogy kids like my kids, or prequel trilogy, understanding where you're coming from certainly will have an influence there. But I grew up, I was born in 1970. So I saw A New Hope in the theaters in 1977, the summer of 77. Before it was A New Hope, it was just Star Wars at the time. Like you, saw all the movies, saw the rest of them in the theater, and made it through the dark times before the prequels came out. But during the time, just before the prequels and during the special editions, I was very fortunate to be a freelance writer who was doing work for the Lucasfilm publication, Star Wars Galaxy magazine. Got to work with Steve Sansweet and got to be more heavily engaged with the special editions, which of course led to the prequels, but also got the opportunity to be at a number of at all three of the prequel premieres in New York City. So the reason I say that is because if we're being real here, I want to get your take as well, Nick, but I think we're both in the same category of people who, as Star Wars fans, to be real, we were not necessarily the biggest fans of the prequels. I know that we've both come around. We've both sort of changed our perspective on it.
Mm-hmm.
But Nick, what was your impression of the prequels when they first hit?
I was thrilled that we were getting new Star Wars. We didn't think when Return of the Jedi ended. I think, in fact, your dad said this when I was up with you guys in New Jersey a couple weeks ago for Potathon. And that Sunday afternoon, I got to hang out with your dad, who I respect and admire so much. And we were just talking about Star Wars and when things came out. And, you know, talking about being of an era where Star Wars ended in 1983. And you thought, that's it. Like this thing that was a flash in the pan that was so great for such a short period of time, it's going to go away and you're not going to have any more. To find out, wait, there's going to be more. That was all I needed as a Star Wars kid. I was like, there's going to be more Star Wars and George Lucas is doing it. Like you didn't have to say anything else. And then the trailer came out. And I remember when the trailer came out, back when Apple trailers was a thing. And like you go to the Apple movie trailers website and you could click on it to try and stream it, which again, at that point in the, you know, early to mid 90s, or you could download it. And I remember clicking to download that trailer and I didn't want it to play because you had like the buffering thing and the bar would move along. Like I didn't want it to play until I had the whole thing because I didn't want it to get interrupted. I didn't want it to wait.
Right.
And so I was in college, halfway through college, and had a desktop computer that our college, quote unquote, gave us. I paid for it for paying for college.
Sure.
But we had T1 internet access, which at the time was
T1
like as fast
Holy
as it
cow.
could be. Like it was a big deal. Plugged directly into the internet, apparently. So when that trailer came out and we get, that's right. It took like 16 hours to download. Like you waited for it to be all the way downloaded so it wouldn't clip or interrupt. But I watched that trailer and my imagination just went crazy. Like we get this crazy red devil looking dude with the double lightsaber. We get Ewan McGregor. We've got Liam Neeson's. You know, all of these things are happening, and we're like, it's back. Star Wars is back. And then I went and saw that movie, and I thought, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I said this recently in another conversation. I spent a decent amount of time in college, after college, for some years going forward, being that's not my Star Wars guy.
Right.
Not hateful. I didn't dwell on it, but I just went, I like the first ones, the original. I'm an OT guy. That's my deal.
Yep.
I simply went, I kind of did the whole, like, I don't really acknowledge that. And that was a little too jerky, but not nearly as much as what you see, you know, now. But that was where I started.
Right.
But I think with age, with wisdom, with maturity, and as you see the way the world works and things happen, you start to learn more about what happened to Jake Lloyd, what happened to Ahmed Best, what happened to the creators and the people that made these stories, the horrible other actual real life things that happen in the world, that you start to go, maybe I should reconsider my point on.
But do you think it's life that's doing that, or do you think it's? I mean, I also think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Star Wars as a universe has expanded so much, and so like when I look at the prequels now, they're a different story because of the lore that goes along with it, and I think that's why a lot of the people who, like you, like me, I mean, when I walked out of the Phantom Menace premiere in New York City, I remember I was honestly like disappointed. I didn't know what to think. I've told the stories too many times about with some of the celebrities that were there, what they said, but the reality was I was disappointed. But now I look back at those movies and I really enjoy them because of what has come since and what has come in to fill in those gaps. And yeah, I mean, that did not stop. I mean, this was we say that The Last Jedi was really where a lot of the fan controversy came in, and we'll get to that, of course, a little bit later. But this was a time when fans were literally saying the quote was, George Lucas raped my childhood. That gets you nowhere. There was a film called The People versus George Lucas. There was the entire Red Letter Media 10-hour assessment. I think it was 10 hours. I don't know if it was or not, but it was a very long assessment of The Phantom Menace. and it took it apart piece by piece, and it talked about why they hated it so much. And again, this is going to come up very important when we get into the return of Star Wars through the Disney acquisition. But there are a lot of people today, the casual fans, and Nick, I think it's important to mention and reference that, especially if you're listening to this podcast as somebody who just found a Star Wars podcast, there's a couple different layers and levels of Star Wars fandom, and it's not meant in gatekeeping at all, but there's the casual fan, which is literally 90% of the world. Those are the people that Disney is trying to get to Disney World, to try to get Disney Plus subscriptions to watch movies when they come out in the theaters. That's the most of the world. The fact that you and I spend too many hours a day on social media and have podcasts and do a weekly show, we're in that rarefied air of people who overly think about Star Wars. And so the people, though, who felt burnt by the prequels, and that was a lot of fans. Not everybody said George Lucas raped their childhood, but a lot of people did say, this sucks. I still talk to people today. I still talk to big fans of Star Wars who say, hate Jar Jar Binks. It was too childish. The acting sucked, this and that. And again, it's a perspective. And I think it's still a lot more prevalent than people think.
Yeah. And I think, like you talked about that 90%, and I mentioned earlier your dad. You and I talk all the time. I kind of call it the my dad factor. Both of our dads, similar ages and generations, introduce us to science fiction and the things that we grew up with. They are also essentially a part of that 90%. Like, they're fans, they love it, but they're not watching all the animation. They're not reading the books. I mean, my dad read the books in the 90s when that's all we had.
Right.
But now he's like, hey, when's that next show coming out? Didn't I see a trailer for that thing on Disney Plus? Like, it's what's most widely accessible. My mother, when Mandalorian came out, hasn't cared about Star Wars basically my entire life, but thought Baby Yoda was cute. And my dad got her a Baby Yoda stuffed animal for Christmas because her stuffed creature or whatever. I guess it's not a stuffed animal, but
stuffed sentient. Maybe.
Yeah, because marketing works and broad-based, that kind of thing that works and appeals. I do want to bring up this comment from Jedi of Chicago. Said, I was more disappointed in the prequels than anything else. They didn't live up to the hype that I had for them, but the supplementary materials has made them much richer. And I think that's important because we have this, especially now in the current climate with Disney Plus and shows and movies and social media and the access we have to creators and podcasts and interviews and previews and all the things that come out. Most of the time, we're the ones that are hyping it up to here. Mm-hmm. But the reality is it's going to fall somewhere short because what I want in a show is not necessarily what Leslie Headland is going to make into a show.
Sure.
It's not what Dave Filoni is going to make into a show. And so hype and disappointment. And I admire people who go, I'm going full blackout. I don't want to watch a single trailer. I don't want to watch I can't do it. I'm not built that way. But the people that go, I just want to come in and enjoy it and see what happens without expectation, that is something to be admired because half the time that's what takes us out is our expectation, our predisposed 100%. Notions of what it's supposed to be.
100%. And when we get to the Last Jedi conversation, we'll hit on that because that harmed me as well. But to Jedi of Chicago, I ask you to hang on and keep that thought in the conversation because supplementary materials are one of the best things and one of the worst things that's happening as it relates to the sequels in the current state of Star Wars, in my opinion. And we'll get to that in just a second. And I love that comment because I too feel exactly the same way. I think the reason I like the prequels now more than I did in the past, and I'm a bit, I've said it to you before, Nick, like when people ask if you're going to put a Star Wars movie in, which one are you going to watch? Which one's going to be the first one that you pull up on Disney Plus? A couple of years ago, I would have said Empire Strikes Back, which is still my favorite Star Wars movie, period, bar none. There's no sense in having the discussion. But if I'm going to sit through a Star Wars movie, I think The Phantom Menace might be the one that I put in. And that shocks me. That shocks me because of the way I felt about it when I walked out the door, when I went for 20 years not liking that movie. 20 years. Right. It took me until about 1999 or 2019 rather to get to a point where I loved it. And I love that movie now. I really do.
Yeah. And it's funny that you say that because that's going to come back in circle for me as we get into these three sequel movies also, as far as rewatchability, rankings. I know you did the poll on Twitter earlier to kind of find out, of the three, which people, all that kind of stuff. I have another thought to that is a little bit counter to, common perception and whatever, but that's another funny thing. You've said that about Last Jedi a bunch of times, that it's not the one you put in. It's the one that's so good, but it's heavy. It's kind of, for me, it's like Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad is a phenomenal TV show.
Sure.
I've watched it, I think, 2 times, top to bottom, because it's heavy. Like, it's not the most rewatchable show that's out there. And that's saying a lot, because I rewatch Game of Thrones and Sopranos every single year, and Deadwood every single year. But there's something about Breaking Bad that feels bleak and stark and heavy, and it's a different thing. Last Jedi has some of those same elements. Like, it's a heavy movie.
For sure. And so, again, we were in this position, this spot where the reality of the world that we were in was that in 2012, October 30th, 2012, was the day that Disney announced that they had purchased Lucasfilm for a measly $4.05 billion. Peanuts. And they immediately announced that new Star Wars was going to be on the horizon, that a new trilogy was already planned that would extend the Skywalker saga. And I remember my father and I had conversations for quite a while, even when I was doing work with Star Wars Galaxy magazine. We used to talk about how great it would be if Lucasfilm was to give up Star Wars a little bit and put out a call for others to write stories, to write movies in the Star Wars universe. And so when I heard that there was a new Star Wars trilogy on the horizon coming from Disney, my initial response was good. And again, when I went back and I saw my Facebook comment the day that it came out, because just to put a little color to it, this was October 30th, 2012. Hurricane Sandy had blown through the East Coast. There was power outages from DC up to Boston. I was somewhere in the middle of a 10-day power outage. My only access to the world was Facebook. And I remember seeing that. And I remember my first thought was, thank goodness it can't be any worse than the prequels. And I will say that, and I will understand that I have changed. And again, that's really important, especially when you talk about the trolls and the grifters and the negativity and the toxicity. You can change. You can change your perspective. It doesn't mean you've sold out. It just means that things have changed for you. But that being said, I was excited that we were going to be getting more Star Wars. Nick, do you remember where you were? And do you remember what your first thought was?
I don't remember where I was. I don't remember where I was, but I do remember my thoughts. And it's the same thoughts I had, not only when we heard there were going to be more Star Wars movies, but also the same thought I had when I found out that Disney had bought Lucasfilm, which is quite simply that I grew up a Disney movies kid. I watched, still to this day, my favorite Disney movies are Sword in the Stone, Robin Hood, the classic, Disney movies. And something that Disney has always done and been known for is telling stories. Every documentary, every biography, anything you read about Walt Disney, reading about Disneyland and Disney World, making it about the illusion. The trash goes down through the ground to underground because you don't want to see, trash in Disney World. You don't want to see the character take off the head. Like, everything about it, that to me was a win, because this is somebody who understands, appreciates, and of course, Walt Disney had long been dead, but the ethos of the company has continued forward. Whether it was in Pixar movies, which were an amazing, addition to all of that. Robin Hood, Matt said the other one that I couldn't come up with, the animated Robin Hood movie. But Disney knows story. And George Lucas, while visionary, technologically, conceptually, all these things, dialogue and story weren't always his strongest aspects of the things that he did. Harrison Ford says, you can write it, but you can't say it. So to bring this IP together with a company who understands how to tell good stories and how to make it immersive and how to make it personal. I mean, you look at things like Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion, the people who unabashedly love these properties. This is a theme park. These are rides.
Yep.
But you have people who are adherents to it because it tells a story, it envelops you, it wraps you in, it grabs you with its arms and says, hey, Chewie, you're home. That's what I wanted for Star Wars. I wanted somebody to take Star Wars and go, you're in good hands. And that's how I felt. And when I heard there were going to be more movies, I went, if anybody's going to do it, these are the people I want to do it. So I was excited for it, for sure.
Yeah. Yep. And the hype train took off quickly too, right? I mean, there was very early on, we knew that J.J. Abrams was going to be a part of it. Again, there was talk that there was going to be a similar model to what was happening with Marvel at the time, which still continues with Marvel. And I think now 10 years later, we're seeing that Marvel model has its flaws, its ups and downs.
There's some limitations.
There's some limitations to it for sure. But I think what we saw was this high level of excitement. And again, I mean, if you think back to Star Wars Celebration that year, and you think back to Anthony Bresnikan bringing us this fall movie preview in Entertainment Weekly, the first pictures that came out, I don't know a Star Wars fan that wasn't excited. I don't know a single Star Wars fan that was not excited about this film, because we knew nothing about it. And I think that was one of the great things about it. So, before we get into the movie itself, Nick, talk to me a little bit about your thoughts on the hype train as it hit.
It was, it was everything we wanted. Star Wars is back. We had Star Wars is back in the 90s. We had Star Wars is back with Force Awakens. And there was, I'll be honest, there was a little bit of, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, that kind of situation.
Right.
But that was just it. Like, I mean, you get these panels and, J.J. Abrams and Kathy Kennedy are on screen and a robot comes rolling out and like, it's not CGI. It's a real robot.
And it's a really weird technology that should not work in physics.
We have not seen this. Like, what is happening? It's a ball and the head stays on the top. Like,
how are they doing it?
And that was what sold me, honestly, like getting that footage. And we weren't remotely in the era we are now with live streams of conventions and footage coming out. Like, I remember seeing the trailer. I think I was sitting in my car, like downloading it on my phone when the trailer dropped because I was out of town for work and I was in the parking lot before I had to go in a meeting and act like a grown up. I was like, oh shit, Star Wars trailer's out. Let me watch it on my phone connected to the Bluetooth in my car.
You had Bluetooth in your car then? Wow. You were fancy.
I think I did. Actually, I'm sure it was plugged in with a cord. Let's not be crazy. But I don't have fancy cars to start with. But it was that thing of like, we're back. Like the hype, the excitement, everything was there. It was clicking. Yeah. We had heard, you get the little tease release photographs. You get the cast. Did we get that cast photo of them all at the read through?
I think that was a Star Wars Celebration. Yeah, with seeing Mark Hamill sitting at a table with Carrie Fisher Hamill and Harrison Ford
around the room with all these people in chairs, and you're looking at it going, "There's that one. There's that one. Okay, this is going to be all right." We didn't know anything about what it meant. But we saw the people who anchored fans, certainly of our age, back to the era that it started and was our most comforting point. Yep. And we went, okay, they're there. I don't care about the rest.
Absolutely. And that was where we went. And that was where we get into the first film. So if you're hanging out with us tonight, thank you so much. We are putting together a podcast where Nick and I are talking about the sequels. We want your thoughts. We want you to weigh in. We are going to run this though like our live show, so we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to dip into the very first film, The Force Awakens, and talk about the good, the bad, and the controversy. Well, we're back with a very special episode of Around the Galaxy, part of the SSW network. We're doing it as an ATG live. So we have people hanging out with us on Twitter and on YouTube and on Facebook, watching us while we record this. As you heard, if you were with us earlier, you've seen that, yeah, it doesn't always go super smooth, but we're doing the best we can. We are talking about the good, the bad, and the controversy of the sequels. And the way we're going to go about doing this, we just went through sort of our history, what it meant leading up to the sequels, and now we're going to go through it film by film. We're going to talk about the good stuff. We're going to talk about the bad stuff. We're going to talk about the stuff that may or may not have worked for certain people, for us in particular, and talk about where we go from here. And so Nick, let's talk a little bit about the first movie, the one called The Force Awakens. What I remember, my first sort of memory of The Force Awakens is that it literally felt like forever for the title to drop. And I remember I was at a conference in California when it dropped, and I just like I am with every single Star Wars movie title, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. But I think this one actually hit me a little bit. It hit me much better than The Phantom Menace, because that title to me that took me some time. That took me some time to get to. Do you remember finding out about the title, or was it you were not? I mean, again, as you've said before, different times, right? So we weren't quite as fully connected all the time thinking about Star Wars. I mean,
I was on the tip of looking for, the trailer to come out. I was ready for the movie. I don't know if there was a whole lot of like, oh, that's what the title is going to be. Like with Rise of Skywalker, that was a much bigger deal because that was Celebration Chicago. There was the video. There was, Colbert hosting the panel and Ian McDiarmid, like that whole thing. But for some reason, the announcement of the title of this one does not stick as much as the trailer itself does. Like we get that trailer, you get Kylo in the woods. The first time the two pieces of the lightsaber shoot out of the sides, like that was that polarizing moment there. I'm like, oh, this is different. Something crazy is going on here.
But and it was also kind of a hint to the change in the way Star Wars was perceived, because you mentioned the trailer. Yes, a lot of people okay, sorry about that. Yeah, a lot of people a lot of people recall the lightsaber. But I also recall it was the first time that we got our first taste of the toxicity in the fandom, because our first image is Finn. It's John Boyega. It's a black stormtrooper. And this was the first time that we saw how Star Wars in the current age of the internet was going to be received. Now, was it as bad as some of the stuff we've seen since? No. And that's not to minimize it at all, because in no way is it acceptable, good, or whatnot. But it was the first time that I remember seeing commentary about the people in Star Wars. And it was a woman, and it was, it was also, so if we even, let's take out those pieces of it, you did have the commentary. There was the initial, that early internet world of, that's a stupid lightsaber. Why do they need a cross guard on a lightsaber? Well, because it's a freaking movie. But it was the early times of a little bit of internet ugliness, if I recall correctly. So you mentioned before about this polls that we did on Twitter. Interesting, and I'll bring them up now, and we can reference them again, because interestingly, it has on Rotten Tomatoes, which put as much weight into it as you want or not. It's got a 93 critic score, which is a very strong score, and it has an 85 audience score. Again, a very strong score. When we asked our thousands of Twitter followers what their favorite Star Wars sequel trilogy film is, Force Awakens came in second at 27%. Last Jedi came in first at almost 60%, and The Rise of Skywalker came in last at 13%. Again, doesn't mean that that's all. We made sure to really caveat it as, which is your favorite of them. And then interestingly,
was that? Go ahead. Can you tell me how many people responded to that survey?
I could, but I'd have to look it up. I'm not sure.
That's okay.
It's a couple
Actually, you
hundred.
keep talking. I'll look it up. I
think
it.
I think it's a couple hundred. And I think the thing to keep in mind, if we're being really honest, is the people who follow ATG Cast on Twitter tend to fall in a similar mindset as us, right? So we also asked their least favorite, and The Rise of Skywalker was overwhelmingly the least favorite at 69%. Last Jedi came in at 18%, 18.5%, and The Force Awakens came in at 12%. So I don't know what that means per se, but it certainly means that what was interesting was there was not, if you look at these, the one that was the favorite and the one that was the least favorite are pretty strong feelings on that, which I think kind of goes to the way people feel about the sequels in general. But again, so one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is J.J. Abrams was writer and director, storyteller of this return to Star Wars. And it is a beat for beat reboot of Star Wars. And when I wrote my original review way back in 2015, I pointed that out, and I pointed out as not a bad thing either. So if I understand what a reboot is essentially telling a story, retelling a story, but making some variation to it. So, instead of having a farm boy from a desert planet, you have an abandoned orphan female girl at
also on a desert planet.
You had a giant Death Star type thing. You have a bad guy in a mask. You start the movie literally with a photo
hiding plans in a robot.
Correct. Right. You literally starting in the most Star Wars way possible. And again, while some people use that as a critique, to me, it felt like the right thing to do. What it was doing to me was it was showing that they weren't walking away from what we knew. They sort of put us in a nice, sort of comfortable chair. They put us in a place that we were going to be comfortable with. And they were rebooting the story. They were retelling Star Wars without retelling Star Wars, without doing the untouchable thing of reshooting and recreating Star Wars.
And there's a key line, one of the first lines in the movie, speaking directly to a lot of fans of our age, a lot of fans of a certain generation and era who had issues with the prequels and still hadn't gotten over it. That line was spoken by the wisdom tree from Game of Thrones, the three-eyed raven himself. He said, "This will begin to make things right."
Yep.
The movie opens up that way.
The very first line. Yep.
Yeah.
And honestly, I remember sitting in the theater and saying to myself and getting it like, aha, okay, they are resetting things.
Right.
Because again, as we said at the top, and I know it's not the popular opinion, but at this point, I was still not yet a prequel fan. I was still working my way through what I thought of them. And again, was happy that we were getting new Star Wars and Max von Sydow saying, this will begin to make things right. That was a message. That was a message to the fans like me. Did you receive it that way? Or did you?
I did. I absolutely did, because there had been enough time had passed. It had been this thing of like, okay, I went through the first time where I thought we're never going to get more Star Wars. And then George Lucas made 3 more, and he made the ones that set up the ones that I grew up and loved. So, I mean, in theory, that's a complete set, right? You get all the way back to when Darth Vader was a kid through the redemption of Darth Vader. 6 movies, nice, clean, tidy. That's it. Yep. What more am I allowed to expect or think of or ask for? And then this thing showed up. And again, in the opening of the movie, that was exactly what I heard. What does he say?
This will begin to set things right.
This will begin to set things right. That's it.
Yep.
And I just went, oh, he's talking to me. Like, he's talking to us. He's talking to a certain group of fans, which kind of continues. And we're going to get into that with The Last Jedi even more, which is 1,000,000% part of why I love The Last Jedi the way I do. But it set up from the beginning, hey, we're here. We hear you. We see you. Because when the original trilogy was made, there were fans, but there wasn't this kind of fan community.
Right.
Then when the prequels were made, the internet is more of a thing, but not remotely what the internet is now, where people are chronically on the internet, you know, ourselves included, you know, 27 hours a day, that it became that thing of recognition. The meta narrative that will feed through these movies is real. And I think it has to be. And we've seen it certainly with the TV shows, and we've seen it with creators who have been attacked. Somebody said earlier in the chat, you know, when they realized what Ahmed Best went through, you know, how much that meant to them or spoke to them. We've heard the stories recently from Clayton Sandell about Jake Lloyd. You know, we've seen these actors and creators in the 90s and 2000s going through this with the prequel trilogy. We get it in the sequel trilogy. Kelly Marie Tran, you know, John Boyega, like the things that also happened to them. But we live in an era now where companies, creatives, people behind these things are also aware of that environment. They're not working in a vacuum of, oh, I didn't know that people were mad about things. Right. They know it. So what do? Take it and use it against them. Turn it around.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it's funny. So we will definitely keep that, put a pin in that one, because I do think that there's that's a critique of the Rise of Skywalker for sure.
Right.
And I have opinions on that as well.
No.
But I think you're right. And I think it's fully intentional that they chose J.J. Abrams, not because he was just a great filmmaker and had done some great things, but he was the king of reboots. He did Star Trek. He did Mission Impossible. He was the executive producer on Westworld, which was a reboot of that movie from the 60s or 70s. Yeah. He, of course, also is the king of the mystery box. He can create stories that will pull you in further, which, of course, if you think about it, The Empire Strikes Back was really the first that I can recall major mystery box where the film ended and said, stay tuned. Right. I mean, other than, of course, the serials of the 30s and 40s, but it was a reboot. And thank you, Jedi of Chicago, saying that him rebooting Star Trek was the key. I think that was 100% it. And again, that's why I say The Last Jedi or The Force Awakens is a reboot of Star Wars. It is not a direct copy. Well, it is, but it's not intended as a shot for shot copy of A New Hope, but all the elements are there. You have, I mean, it starts exactly the same. It's the guy in black, the bad guy in black, who has a direct line to the Emperor, is there. He's brutally taking out soldiers. I mean, the whole opening is there.
He's bringing the stormtroopers, and somebody's hiding plans or maps or whatever in a droid,
right?
And sending the droid off so they can get captured.
Right. Leia,
heard that story before.
Leia, wise cracking to Vader. Poe, I can't hear you with all that apparatus.
Yeah, the apparatus. Who talks first? You talk first?
It's all there. But again, I think some people use that as an opportunity to critique it from a negative perspective, whereas I saw it as, I get it. They are rebooting this franchise so that we can get new stories. In fact, the end of I'll read it. The end of my initial critique, my initial review of The Force Awakens was, at the end of the day, this Star Wars film is what we all wanted the prequels to be. Again, listen, I get it. All right. Is what we all wanted the prequels to be. If episodes 8 and 9 are done right, however, they will not dwell on the fond memories of that this one evoked, like Rey flying the Falcon at the end of the movie. They need to let these new characters take control of the story, or as beautiful as this one was, they will fail. I have faith that The Force Awakens has begun to, quote, set things right. And in 18 months, we'll know if it worked. Of course, it was 2 years, not 18 months. But point being there, they had to do this. They had to reboot. They had to hand it off to the new characters. And that's one of the things that pissed people off, was that they handed it off to new characters. Now, I'll never forget Mike Morrissey, I think it was, who is a Star Wars author, was on Around the Galaxy 100 years ago. And one of the things he said was that the biggest problem for the sequels was that they were episodes 7, 8, and 9. If they were just the continuing saga of the Star Wars story, they would have been free of the shackles of making sure these stories were directly connected. the fact that, you know, we'll get to it in a second. In fact, maybe we should start to dig into the good, the bad, and the controversy now.
Yeah.
But you did have Luke Skywalker was promised. He doesn't have any lines in the movie. Yep. And so that was a bit of the controversy. But let's talk about the things that we liked about this movie. I'll start. You know, it captured that feel and excitement of Star Wars. It captured something that wasn't there, in my opinion, in the prequels. It has. I'm going to play this. This is a very short clip, an 8-second clip. But this to me is my favorite. This captures what this movie did.
Hey, are you okay? Yeah.
I love the interplay between Finn and Rey throughout the movie.
Throughout the movie.
It's such a shame that by the time we get to Rise of Skywalker, it was diminished. And I'm going to get there. Oh, yes. If you're following along, I'm going to get there. But that interplay between the two, that like when they're in the Falcon, she's like, that one, no, that one, that one, that one. I love that.
Boyfriend, cool boyfriend. When he climbs up to look out the window and he stands on her head, like from the get-go, quit taking my hand when they're running in the desert. Like every single bit of it is two strong people. I don't need you. He's trying to help, need you. Like, just, it's glorious. It works so well. And it was so appealing. And then him, you know, trying to be the imposter. First Order. Oh yeah, I'm the rebellion.
Big deal.
What is it?
Resistance.
Resistance. Yeah. Resistance. You know, Han calls him big deal. We'll get into the whole Han thing. Like, oh my God. But like when he's talking to BB-8, come on, you know, help me, droid, please. Like that crap's funny. The thumbs up from BB-8, and there is a debate online, and I think you know this, Pete, but there is a debate online. Our friends at Star Wars Minute love to help propagate this. Does BB-8 give Finn a thumbs up, or is he giving him the middle finger when he pops that lighter out?
I never thought it was the middle finger until our friends at Star Wars Minute said that, and now I'm ruined.
Said it, and
now it's ruined.
Yeah, I watched it this weekend, and there's a part of it that was like, it might be, but it is. And TW says it right here. It felt like that original trilogy humor again, humor, action, drama. Day Zero Revelation as Rey. I mean it. I agree with you completely. That's such a great character. She develops, she grows. I watched the movies in preparation for this. I watched all 3 of them in the last 2 days, I guess. All of my family has gone to summer camp, except for one of my 16-year-olds, the one who cares the least about Star Wars. And so I even said, hey, watch these with me. I want your opinions and insight. And she did. Yeah. And so some of that will fold into these conversations. But you're exactly right. That interplay hooked me from the beginning. And that's before we even get to Chewie, we're home. And before we get to you changed your hair, same jacket when Leia shows up. And all of the things that appeals to my 1978 born, 80s loving child.
Well, and honestly, I think that is that again goes to the freaking stupid meme of showing senior citizen versions of Mark Hamill, Billy D. Williams, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford saying, this is what we were ripped off. We didn't get this.
Right.
We got it. We got what we deserved. And again, I hate the phrase, and I will go down in flames on this. But any fan, whether it's positive or negative, who posts, we deserved X. No, you deserve nothing. You get the story you get. And if you don't like that story, that's okay.
Nobody's keeping you here.
100% fine. Nobody's keeping you here. That's 100% right, Nick. Nobody's keeping you here. But I think the handoff in the Force Awakens was pretty perfect. We didn't know Carrie Fisher was going to pass away, which we'll get into on The Last Jedi. But the handoff was really nice, and Harrison Ford got what he wanted from
the
Jedi. Han Solo goes down in a sacrificial moment. He does what he needs to do. He was the Obi-Wan of this movie. He he died at the hands of the Vader figure in an effort to help his cause and help people get away. Of course, he was also trying to save, but much like Kenobi, who said to Vader, when there's and now that of course we have the Kenobi series, we know there's a little bit more. Gosh, I wish I could help this guy. Same thing with Han and Kylo, but I think it was the handoff we deserved. Literal handoff at the end of the movie from Rey Luke with the saber. But what else would you put in the good category? I mean, there's a ton of things, and I know you just hit on a bunch of them, but
to me, honestly, it was just how it felt familiar. It felt, for me as a Star Wars, it felt like Star Wars. And I think that a big part of that was, something that was a big controversy, something that was a problem for me early on when the prequels came out was, you give somebody a toy or a new skill. Like when my daughter learned to whistle, she walked around the house whistling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I felt like Old Man Gower in It's a Wonderful Life when he yells at George Bailey and he's like, "Stop that damn whistling. You're not a canary." Like, I was like, you got to stop with the whistling. It's making me crazy. When the prequels came out, it was like, George, the blue screen, the green screen, we got to dial it down. Like it felt cartoony. Like there was a thing there. But in this movie, we brought back a lot of emphasis on practical effects. We brought back a lot of emphasis on practical sets, building things, building the Millennium Falcon set, building, going to Abu Dhabi to the desert to watch Finn. There's the behind the scenes documentary. It's on YouTube. It's not on Disney Plus. And John Boyega is talking about walking across this thing with a wide shot from a distance, peeling off his stormtrooper armor in the middle of the desert. Like that makes it feel real. And that's what makes it feel like Star Wars. The first time I felt that in that movie, it's actually close to the clip that you played. But when Rey comes back with her findings and she's sitting at that table and she's scrubbing the things with the scrub brush, with the, steel wool and the parts that she found, like that felt like Star Wars because it was practical. It was real. Somebody had their hand on it. It wasn't acting to a tennis ball on a stick. So I think to me, the reintroduction of practical effects coupled with this beautiful CGI that we have now, the beautiful technology that we have that continues to develop even beyond what we have now, I think that was a big part of it. It felt familiar. It felt like Star Wars. And then when you introduce Chewbacca and Han Solo and Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia into those things, that's when you're going, that was my Chewie we're home moment. It's like, this feels like Star Wars. Star Wars, we're back.
But I'll use that to bridge into the bad, right? A little bit, because as you even said, I think at one point that because it felt familiar, maybe that's a little bit lazy. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
And I think that relates to kind of what you hit on early on. It wasn't a shot for shot remake of New Hope, but it has every single element going all the way through. Another Death Star. They say it in the briefing. Oh, it's another Death Star. No, it's way bigger. Like, no, it's a big ass.
It's another Death Star, guys. You got lazy.
Same thing. We've got to blow up the thing that nobody knew could be the thing. Robot getting the plans at the the beginning. The hero gets captured so that the robot can get away with the thing we're trying to. Like, that to me is the part that familiar but late. I've seen this movie. That was what I felt when I left. I went, I've seen this movie before. I mean, I like it. I like the first one. I like this one too, but I've seen this movie before. So when I say a little bit lazy, it really is mostly from the aspect of there was an opportunity to do what they did, but maybe color outside the lines a little bit more.
Yeah, and I dare say that is one of the things with this movie is there's not a lot of bad to it, and your biggest bad is that it's a reboot. And again, we talked about it at length earlier on. It was intended to be a reboot, so it's kind of hard to call that. And I'm with you though, because when I realized that Starkiller Base was another Death Star, I was like, this is Death Star 3. We got to do something.
We've had 2. Let's do another one. Make it bigger. Make it built into a planet.
Right. How can you make a Death Star more scary?
But wait.
How about
But then we go 2 more movies forward. We go The Last Jedi, and it's miniaturized Death Star tech on crate to break open the big ass door. And then we go to 9, and it's every single Star Destroyer has a Death Star
on every Star Destroyer.
So, it goes from Death Star, big ass Death Star. Now we're making Death Star like, no, you get a Death Star, and like Oprah handing out Death Stars.
The other issue that I have with it is actually something that is an issue only because they didn't fulfill the mystery boxes. There were so, and this is a J.J. Abrams problem. J.J. Abrams set up 2 major mystery boxes to me, and he closed out the damn series. And we'll get to it when we talk Rise of Skywalker. But he missed, first of all, the vision of Rey should have appeared in every single one of those little scenes, those little snippets should have appeared somewhere in the next 2 movies. And, you know, I wrote my treatment for episode 9 that even Colin Trevorrow responded to. And the Knights of Ren should have been answered for. And again, we'll get to that when we get to Rise of Skywalker. The other thing is the mystery box around how did Maz get the lightsaber? She said that's a story for another time. Sounds like it's going to be a book sometime. I'm not going to read it. Sorry, it'll be a comic. Sorry, Chris, I won't be reading the comic book.
I'm gonna have to look it up on Wikipedia.
Right. I'm gonna thank you, Wikipedia, if you're hanging out for covering that for me, because you're right. I'm definitely not going to read that. But the mystery box, of course, of who Rey's parents were. Okay, we'll get to that for sure.
I have thoughts about that for sure.
But again, mystery boxes were left, which at the time was fine because we said this is going to be great. We have episodes 8 and 9 to come. We're going to get those stories. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm also not a fan of necessarily having to give all the backstory. And I think that's why certain things in Last Jedi that people didn't like worked extremely well for me. Nobody knew who Emperor Palpatine was in Return of the Jedi. All we knew was that he was the bad guy. He needed to die, and that's okay. But to leave some of those mystery boxes unfulfilled turned into an issue and part of the controversy. Was there any other bad that I'm missing from you, Nick? Again, I feel like overall it's a solid movie. It's hard to find real bad with this movie.
It is a solid movie. And the other thing that I had put in our notes as we kind of shared this document back and forth about, you know, the bad, quote unquote, when it boils down, and we'll kind of get through this because we've still got 2 more movies to get through. Ultimately, this is the least interesting of the 3 movies to me personally. Because partially it felt like I've seen this movie before. I've already read this book. I know how it ends. But what happens in the next couple coming up, spoiler alert for one of the other, polls that you put out there. But if I'm ranking them, this is my least favorite of the 3 sequel movies. And that's a surprise. And that's, that's the way it goes. But I've seen this movie before. It's not bad, but I know it happens. The next 2 actually push me a little bit outside my skis, as they say. It gets me, into territory that I'm not as familiar with. So for me, the other quote unquote bad, which, I say a lot of times, if my problems are, luxuries to 90% of the world, if this is what's bad about this particular Star Wars, it's still a fantastic movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it also kind of leads to the controversy, right? Because the only real controversy for this movie at the end of the day was that Luke had no lines. So a lot of people were kind of upset about that. But I thought it was perfectly done. And that Rey beat, okay, I'm going to throw this out here because I have to settle this. And this will be, we'll clip this out because this is something that I firmly believe in. People who complain that Rey beat Kylo with the lightsaber were not paying attention to the movie. And people tell me that about the somehow Palpatine return line. I'm ready for it. Bring it on. But you weren't paying attention to the movie because Rey eventually Skywalker, Rey Palpatine, just Rey.
Rey from
in
nowhere.
This movie, when we meet her, she when Finn meets her, she beats the crap out of him with a staff. She has been defending herself her entire life. She also had, as we heard in The Last Jedi, there's something that's been in her that she felt. So she may not have trained with Yoda for 48 hours on Dagobah, like apparently you need to have in order to not be a Mary Sue. She's not a Mary Sue because she has proven herself. Additionally, the entire movie, twice throughout the movie, Han Solo makes a big deal about how powerful the crossbow is. Chewie nailed Kylo with a crossbow. So Kylo's he's on injured reserve by the time she gets to him, right? So
so if I can even throw this maybe into I don't even think it's in the bad character, it's just in the nitpick category. 2 times in this movie, Han makes a big deal about the crossbow.
Right.
The bowcaster. I'm sorry, not the crossbow.
Right.
The
Sorry,
bowcaster.
you were right. Yep.
He makes a big deal about it. I like this thing.
Yeah.
Can I borrow that?
Yep.
Am I supposed to believe that in the 30 ass years that they've been together, more than that since Solo, a Star Wars story, that Han's never once used that thing until now? That's my nitpick. Those are the things that really I'm like, wait a minute. Come on now. That's what I really get worked up
See,
about.
the only way I can make that work, I agree with you. It is kind of silly that he never shot it once. Like they were out drinking some point and he was like, let me shoot that thing. The only thing I can think of in my head canon is that Chewie is so defensive of it. It took him being injured to have him finally give it up. But to your point,
to give it up.
But, and you're right. But that is the point though, is JJ went out of his way to say, hey, this thing is powerful. This thing kicks ass. This thing shot Kylo Ren in the side and he survived. And the scavenger who's never held a lightsaber but has fought.
But is a survivor.
A survivor.
And you know what? Nobody pitched a fit about the fact that Finn used that lightsaber to fight off the TR-8R stormtrooper. Yes, he's had combat training because he's a stormtrooper and they probably taught hand-to-hand combat and
that is an awesome point.
And whatever the hell it is. But at the same time, Rey did the same thing. She didn't go to Stormtrooper Academy. She grew up on the hardscrabble streets of Jakku, USA. And she had to learn to take care of herself and defend herself and, fight off the goons that were coming after her. Okay, great. So you put a laser sword in your hand. Same thing. It's not a big, long stick. It's a laser sword.
I love that you said that because you're right. I have never once heard somebody complain about Finn taking out it, not only defending himself with the lightsaber, winning.
He killed a couple dudes. Yeah.
So you're 100% right. So again, the controversy for this film was contrived. A lot of it was looking back. It was rear view mirror controversy. Once people started to hate Rey in The Last Jedi, which we'll get to in a little bit after the break.
TW's got us Jakku USA.
That's our next shirt. All right, dude. As soon as we're done, I'm getting on Photoshop. TW, if you email me your address, man. If we make that shirt, it's coming to you. I promise you. But that's just it. There was so much rear view mirror controversy that came out of The Last Jedi for reasons that I am having a very difficult time proving, that I would love to get into. And Nick, if you'll stick around, I know you will, we've talked about this, but if you're willing to stick around, and if you who are listening to us and hanging out with us are willing to stick around, we are going to get to just the second of 3 movies. We're going to get into The Last Jedi, which is without a doubt the most controversial Star Wars film ever created. We thought it was The Phantom Menace, but oh no, we got The Last Jedi. So we'll be back in just a minute with more of the sequel trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Controversy. And we are back. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. We see a lot of people hanging out with us on Twitter tonight, so thank you so much. Please make sure to share it. Get some more friends joining us. If you're with us here on the YouTube channel, we can see your comments. For some reason, we can't see your comments on Twitter, but head on over to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/@the SSW Click on this video. Join us. Get into the chat. We got a lot going on. We're about to get into the 2 most controversial movies of the sequel trilogy. When people talk about why the sequels are controversial, this is where the shit hits the fan, if you will. Nick, the next movie was a little film called The Last Jedi.
I've heard of it.
You may have heard of it. Again, as we said earlier, when we asked our fans, our thousands of Twitter followers, what is your favorite Star Wars sequel trilogy film? Overwhelmingly, 60% to 60% said The Last Jedi, followed closely, not closely at all, but followed about 50% of them. The Force Awakens came in, and then Rise of Skywalker came in dead last. So The Last Jedi is an interesting movie. I'll also add, Nick, that the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, 91%, which is a little bit behind Force Awakens. But the audience score is 41%. And as we all know, part of that is inevitably part of some score bombing. But it's also, let's be real, and this is where we're going to start to get a little bit more real. I mean, when you talk to the average fan, again, let's go back to that guy who still hasn't gotten over the prequels, that guy who still thinks Jar Jar Binks is not for him, the guy who still thinks that George Lucas may or may not have raped his childhood. When you ask them which movie they don't like The Last Jedi. This is the movie that a lot of folks don't love. What do you think of that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, one, I love that because this is, we talk as Star Wars podcasters, as content creators, we have a lot of times when people want us to rank the movies.
Yep.
You've done a good job of saying, this is my 9th favorite or my 11th favorite, doesn't have to be last, doesn't have to be, whatever it is. Everybody can get a trophy. That's fine. It's like upwards basketball, but Star Wars. But if I'm going to be forced into a corner, if I'm going to have to pick some things, this is where Star Wars has broken down for me since this movie came out. My favorite Star Wars movie is The Empire Strikes Back. I'm of that generation. I'm of that era. It's the movie that I just think top to bottom is a phenomenal movie. Like Mount Rushmore of movies, period. Not because it's a sequel,
not just a great Star Wars movie. It's one of your favorite movies.
Empire, and a couple of other movies. Like right there, top tier. It's my favorite Star Wars movie. But if you ask me what do I think is the best Star Wars movie, it's The Last Jedi.
Yep.
And it's The Last Jedi because of the story it tells, the meta narrative that comes with it, that connects all 7 movies up to this point, bringing in the threads of what Star Wars is, what this is going to be. And I love it. And the fact that people lose their mind over it, there's a couple of things. One, a lot of the people that lose their mind over it, I don't think they know why. Because when you have 5, 10, 30 seconds of a measured conversation where you go, well, here's why I think this, they go, I never thought about that. Little bit of a peek, a little bit of a story. Our good friend Jeff Qualio, who's a patron supporter, who's been a part of live shows and call-ins and all those things, lives here with me in Montgomery, not here in my house, but here in Montgomery, fellow Montgomery, Alabama native. We met because we were extras on the Wonder Years, the TV show, the reboot that shot here for a week a couple of years ago. On the set of that show, waiting in costume line or whatever we were doing, he saw my Star Wars tattoo. He's like, "You like Star Wars?" I was like, "Buddy, you just opened a can of worms." Very quickly, one of the first questions, well, how do you feel about The Last Jedi?
Yeah, there you go.
I told him. And he didn't agree. But within a short span of time, having a conversation, he's like, wow, I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not going to say I turned him around. I'm not some evangelist that is out preaching The Last Jedi on the corner of the streets, if only that paid well. But it is that thing that people hate it, but I think a lot of times people don't know why they hate it.
Right.
They're not sure why they're mad. I think that 41 score between the review bombing and the people who really just haven't taken enough time to think about it aren't sure why it's there. Because like you, when I saw it the first time in the theater, I left and I went, what?
Yep.
I don't know. But I took an hour. I texted with a friend of mine and I was like, oh, Like it was like time release. Like as time went on, I went, oh shit, this is better than I thought it was.
It took me to my second or third viewing to really dig it, because I walked out of the movie. I remember I walked out of it, and the first thing I said was that was both the best and worst Star Wars movie I'd ever seen, and that was my feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so many things about that movie that work toward making you feel that way. Not the least of which is Rian Johnson, who has openly said that he when he makes movies, he's out to not subvert expectations, but to sort of change what you think. I want to read this one Rian Johnson quote, because as we know, Mark Hamill fundamentally disagreed with Rian Johnson's characterization of Luke, but as you point out, and you're 100% right, after seeing the movie, he got it. After seeing it play out, he acknowledged why he did it. But Ryan said, and the fandom menace, the people who don't like Disney era Star Wars, the people who are consistently fighting against The Last Jedi, always say, well, Rian Johnson would wanted to subvert my expectations. And he may have said that in one form or another, but in an article with Slash Film, he said, I guess the first thing to say is, coming into writing this or any story, the object is not to subvert expectation. The object is not surprise. I think that would lead to some contrived places. The object is drama, and in this case, the object was figuring out a path for each one of these characters where we challenge them and thus learn more about each of them by the end of the movie, which you have to say, whether you like the movie or not, that is something that Rian Johnson did absolutely brilliantly in this movie. He challenged every single character, from Poe to Holdo to Luke to Rey, even to Rose, challenged them. And look, life is that challenge. And when you are challenged, how you respond, that's your story. And that's what I think he did incredibly well there.
I agree completely. And I think that, when you see a movie like this, when you have expectations. I think certainly we are faced with the change from J.J. Abrams to Rian Johnson. Yep. And you have said it many times, and I'm going to get it wrong if I say it, so you may end up having to correct me. But the reality is, J.J. Abrams, just go ahead and say it. You say it better than I do.
Yeah. No, so my feeling is that J.J. Abrams is a fan of Star Wars movies, and Rian Johnson is a fan of Star Wars stories, which is why, like you, Nick, to me, The Last Jedi, I will probably, if I have 11 Star Wars movies to watch, Last Jedi will probably be number 10 that I'll watch. Maybe number 9. I might watch it before Attack of the Clones. But it's my favorite Star Wars story, because not only does Rian Johnson create this really difficult story. Look, he says it in the trailer.
It's in the trailer. Yep.
This will not go the way you think. And I have to tell you, that phrase goes through my head constantly, all the time. And that's what he did with this movie. The story was not, because, and I think, and I've said this before on the show, so for those of you who are fans, you've heard me say this, but if you're new, welcome. You're going to hear me say this a lot. I didn't like the Last Jedi when I first saw it, because in my head, I had written that movie, because The Force Awakens was so much a carbon copy of A New Hope. I thought for sure it was going to have a training montage. We were going to get more of the Knights of Ren. We were going to get this. We were going to get that. It was going to follow more of an Empire Strikes Back kind of story. And it's funny. There are people who say it follows Empire Strikes Back directly. How? I don't see Empire Strikes Back in that movie literally at all. It is hard for me to find an Empire Strikes Back connection.
I can see some moments of it, and I'll take the contra other side of your devil's avocado, Larry, if you will. If I can be the devil's advocate for a moment, I do see some Empire elements in simply, it doesn't end on the most hopeful note. Like, yes, the heroes are still on the ship, right? They're what survives, but it's not, it's not this resounding victory. Like, they got away is what happened. So, Empire was more of a cliffhanger. Empire was more of like, oh, wait, Han Solo's gone and these guys are leaving and Luke's hands gotten cut off. It wasn't as hardcore as that, but it was still not like, ooh, we beat the bad guy. Let's go, celebrate and eat stormtrooper heads or whatever it is that we're going to do.
But you talked about that difference, and I think you're right. And I think though that's part of the problem that I had, and I remember talking about this with my neighbor across the street, the guy who I talk about all the time, my friend Adam, who we go to see the movies on Thursday nights, all the big blockbusters. Leave the kids home. We go check out the movies. I remember saying to him, we don't need an episode 9. That movie could have ended right there. It would have, they could have ended the saga with, okay, so that's it. They need to reinvigorate hope. What did T.W. McKay say before? You put something up there on the screen. I want to mention it.
Well, we had this one. He said, seriously, Star Wars said TLJ is very much like Empire Strikes Back. And then TW said, also, I know supplemental, but the line surrounding Luke's farewell and novelization still lives with me.
TW, you're talking about supplemental material again. We're going to get to that in Rise of Skywalker, dude.
But I do want to bring this up because this was the other part of this, talking about supplemental material, the novelization of The Last Jedi, written by a friend of the show, Jason Fry.
Yep.
In the beginning of that book, the thing that we don't get in this movie is Luke kind of having his, last temptation of Christ moment where he's dreaming about, what if he just got married? What if he just had a family and a life?
What if I stayed with Fixer and Cammy?
Yeah. What if I had stayed and it hadn't become what it was? And so those things, are out there and float and exist in the ether also. TW also said, I grew up with Legends Luke in my head. That movie was a shock to the system. It still moved me to tears after watching it.
Yep. So that's a really interesting point, because of the fact that this scene that I just put up here on the screen, for those of you listening, it's a picture of Luke standing in front of an army, a full line of walkers, and Kylo's ship coming down. This is comic book Luke Skywalker. This is Legends EU Luke Skywalker. I don't care what anybody says. And the people who say that not my Luke Skywalker, this was your Luke Skywalker, guys. He faced that. I mean, this is the brilliance of Rian Johnson, and
did it while subverting expectations at the exact same time.
Correct. And if you, we'll get to some of the bad and some of the controversy, but the reality is, everything that people say Rian Johnson didn't do, he actually did with this movie. He took his time to get there. He did so much with it. Let's start to move into some of the good, because we've already started talking about it, because obviously for you and I, this is one of our favorite. Is this your number one of the sequels?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is my number one story. I will, if I have to choose one of the 3 to watch, I'm putting in Force Awakens. If you have to pick one of the 3 to watch, which one are you putting in?
And this one.
Really?
Yeah.
So I'm putting in Force Awakens, and I've done that multiple times. I just throw it in, just be like, okay, because it's, you know what? And it's probably because, as you said, it's the least interesting story, so I don't have to pay attention. It's like,
you don't have to pay attention.
I just throw it in. It's there. This movie, I have to focus. But so let's get to some of that. I think the way I've described this movie is it's the most intimate of any of the Star Wars movies, and I think that really comes, and I don't mean in the Reylo sense, and I'm not going to talk Reylo here, because I do feel like the Reylo piece really bent this entire piece of this of the fandom a little bit out of shape, for better or worse. And again, if you saw a Kylo Ren Rey romance, awesome, enjoy it. I did not. And I remember, because Jason Fry was on the show, and I remember talking, we spent a lot of time in depth. If you're checking out the podcast, go back and find the first interview we did with Jason Fry. Jason talks about, I asked him, is there a romance between Kylo and Rey? And he said they had the most intimate connection that you can possibly have. They were in each other's heads. That doesn't mean it's romance. That doesn't mean it's physical. It doesn't mean it's love, but it was a connection that you cannot walk away from. And I think, though, that's why this movie worked, because you had personal decisions. We talked before about The Force Awakens, or rather, we talked a little bit before about how we didn't talk about it. It was actually in the video at the opening, where a story is about. Oh no, you talked about it. Sorry, I'll just edit this out. My rambling here. Mark the clock. 1 minute 19 seconds. The concept of story right? Force Awakens was just a fun story. It was a brainless story. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. But this is a story where Poe has to deal with, he was such a hotshot pilot and so convinced he could beat the First Order that he lost an entire bomber squadron.
But it comes with a cost.
Right. Yep. Haldo had to decide what's the right thing to do. I am a commander in this rebellion. I need to make this ultimate sacrifice. Yep. Luke had to decide, how am I going to help my sister for the last time? So these are personal decisions. And then that great connection between Rey and Kylo, what would become the dyad in the Force, which is one of the weakest parts of the Rise of Skywalker to me.
Hold on, we're not there yet. Hold on.
But the connection between the two of them made for some of the most interesting stories. Again, you know, I showed that clip before of Rey and Finn, but when she talks to Kylo, she rips him apart. Like, she's like, you're a monster. You are you are the worst. And she goes at him. And again, it's that kind of one-to-one, person-to-person intimate relationship that you don't see in Star Wars. You don't see people going at that level of really questioning. I mean, the last time I think you could have seen it was maybe in the way Obi-Wan had to deal with Anakin and his fall. It's a similar sort of thing. So from a good perspective, I really think the story being so intimate. What would you throw out there?
There are a couple of things. I really do love the commentary on the hubris and the fall of the Jedi. You know, Luke, when they're talking, they're in the cave. He's going, look, you know, this isn't all heroes and fancies and unicorns and whatever. And in fact, he says the phrase, what am I supposed to do? Walk out and face down the First Order with my laser sword, which is its own, you know.
That's exactly what he did.
And that's why I was going to say, you put this clip up. That is exactly what he did. And that's what I love about Rian Johnson doing this, is he did that, but not in the way anybody had the expectation that he was going to do it. They didn't have the idea that Luke was sitting on a rock, force timing himself across the galaxy to be able to be, you know, a Tupac hologram at Coachella, waiting to distract them so they could get away. Like, that wasn't the plan. But Luke says it to Rey, you know, it in the trailer. This isn't going to go the way you think. He's talking to me. He's talking to you. He's talking to all 100%. Of us. And going, look, I know you think these movies are this, but there's more here. It's a bigger story. It's a bigger galaxy.
And that to me is the irony of the fans who don't like it. Is this movie is specifically made for them. This is a movie for people who think they know Luke Skywalker. And at the end of the day, Luke Skywalker, and again, this makes sense as to why Mark Hamill disagreed with it. Because Mark Hamill was one of those guys. Mark Hamill had this vision of what Luke was going to do. And at the end of the day, Luke did it and then some. He created this hope for the galaxy. And look, the people who did not like this Luke Skywalker in this movie, it's probably because they saw themselves. And in fact, that's the reason why I liked this Luke Skywalker in this movie, because I saw myself. I saw the famous Yoda line. They what is it? They grow to, what was it?
They are what we are, what they grow beyond.
Right. You have to pass that on. Correct. And again, I think much like we talked about before, Rian Johnson understood that the handoff happened in The Force Awakens. There was no need for that crappy meme to, we deserved Lando and Luke and Han and Leia. No, we didn't. This story has moved on. And I look at my son and my daughter. I look at my daughter making a Rey costume in 2015 before she saw the movie. This was her Luke Skywalker. And the time had come to pass that on. And Luke Skywalker doing what he did, facing down the First Order with his laser sword, to allow his sister and the First Order to make it out alive, plus inspire hope in the galaxy that Leia could not find. Remember, she put out the signal to the galaxy and nobody responded.
Nobody came.
But Broom Boy did. Broom Boy saw it happening. So this was a situation where Luke did. It's probably more powerful than anything he could have done had he actually shown up and fought Snoke face to face.
Correct. Right? And it creates what you see. And again, the meta narrative of the whole thing, not only speaking to us as fans, speaking to us, in this universe, but what we had prior was the Jedi, warrior monks. They were generals. They led peace. And like, if you go back to the eras like the High Republic, which you and I are not at all versed in, but like they weren't generals then. Like they were counselors, and they were, it was wisdom, and it was this different thing. And as we see those eras and generations shift, they become warrior monks with magic powers and whatever. And something else that we get in this movie that we haven't really talked about is Luke standing in that doorway, and he says, after he has that big conversation with Rey, it's time for the Jedi to end.
Yep.
Now, he doesn't mean that it's time for Force users to end. It's about the dogma. It's about the rules and the structure. And so what he's able to do is not go out and physically fight Kylo Ren and cut another hand off, because Star Wars loves to cut a hand off. He's able to go out there and go, you think it's all about fighting and swordplay and being a big badass warrior. I'm here to tell you it's about distracting you so that the people that are going to continue to lead this rebellion can get away. It's the pacifist approach. Luke Skywalker's going, I'm going to do, I'm going to get into good trouble, to borrow a phrase from John Lewis. He's going to go, I'm going to distract you. I'm going to brush my shoulder off, and you can shoot at me and be mad all you want. But the reality is
my family's getting away.
But I've got your attention, and the person who's going to restart this thing and is going to focus on the broom boys and the people who are Force sensitive. Maz Kanata herself in this movie, she says, I'm no Jedi, but I know the Force. I take that to mean she can use the Force. I don't take that to just mean, oh, I've read about it a bunch. But it's a different story because it expands the world and the universe. The Force wasn't just people who were selected to be a part of this special monastic order. Who weren't supposed to have attachments and weren't supposed to be in love and weren't supposed to do this. Other people could do it too. And you see it in a kid sweeping up a horse stall at the end of the movie. He walks down the steps and without thinking about it, puts his hand out and the broom shoots into his hand. That's where the power in this movie.
100%. And you also, you mentioned at the top of this section about how it talks about the hubris. To me, this is the only one of these three movies that has any connection to the prequels. It's the only one that says Darth Sidious. It's the only one that alludes to what George was trying to do with the prequels, was to show, hey, if you lose sight of what you are, this is what happens. And yeah, you could argue all day. I mean, if we get into a little bit of the bad, the humor, the your mama joke. Look, anybody who doesn't like that joke and complain and claims to be a prequel fan is 100% full of shit, because Jar Jar Binks stepping in EOP crap and making a joke about it and the fart joke at the freaking pod race is no different than your mama joke. So if you didn't like it, it's because you didn't like it and you were trying to find a reason to not like it. I will talk about a couple things that I didn't like. And again, we could do this. I can do this all day.
I actually have one more quick thing.
Please.
Like, we don't have to spend a lot of time on it.
No, let's go for it.
This was the movie that Kylo Ren clicked for me. The first movie in Force Awakens, I was like, okay, whatever, bad guy mask, Han Solo's kid, I get it. The passion, and I attribute a lot of this to Adam Driver and his acting and what he put into this character. Like, I reached a point where I was like, oh, he annoyed me at first, but like, not that I'm on his side, but I get it. Like, he became more compelling, even in his own right. The things that he was trying to accomplish, feeling, overlooked by Snoke, the moments where he's, dealing with all of that, wanting to take his place, take over, become the supreme leader. Like, there was a turning point for me in this movie with Kylo Ren.
Well, I mean, even I think there's so much to be said for how great, why can't I think of his name? The guy who plays Snoke. It's gonna kill me. I'm gonna look it up.
Yeah, he's Caesar.
Yeah, he's Caesar. He's Gollum. Damn it, where's the chat when you need him?
I got him. Andy Serkis.
Andy Serkis. Thank you so much. When Andy Serkis says you're just a child in a mask, that's how we all felt about Kylo Ren in Episode 7.
Yeah,
right.
Throwing those tantrums, chopping up the computer terminal.
Just an emo bitch. Like, stop, stop it. And Snoke calls him out on it, and I think that was the moment that I think we all, because he responded to it in a way that was honestly much like we would expect. He went and had a tantrum and broke the mask, but like, I agree. Like, he became almost a pitiful character, and when and the proof in the pudding there is when Luke beats him, and he realizes it, and we as an audience realize it. You're like, oh man, like he fell for it, and so did I, and that was the connection that you had with him, right? We wanted to make fun of him when he was shouting more, and just because he was being a petulant child. He was being a brat, just like, keep firing. And when Luke beats him, you almost feel bad for him. And that's brilliant writing. That's brilliant work. Yes. And TWK says, I also think Johnson had Kylo break the mask to separate Kylo from Vader. And again, Rise of Skywalker, freaking missed the boat on that one, but we'll get to that one in just a couple minutes. Let's talk a little bit about, we can talk about the bad, but look, I do think, I think you can make a great argument that Canto Bite was a great idea that just failed miserably. People want to say that Rose was a wasted character. She wasn't. She just wasn't used well enough. I've said it before. I would have preferred, this is my sort of my alternate story version. Instead of Canto Bite, I would have sent Poe and Finn along to Crate to do some reconnaissance and sort of build that character. I'd rather see a relationship between Poe and Finn, and I'm not even talking about a romantic relationship. I would have liked to have seen that relationship grow a little bit. And I also feel like, some of the last bit of bad from that was, I just really feel like that relationship was not built. They didn't take, you knew that Finn and Poe had a great admiration for each other. But I would have liked to have seen that grow just a little bit.
Yeah.
But we can get into the controversy, because that's where The Last Jedi really has become a lightning rod. Let's talk about the things that people bitch about. The Leia Mary Poppins moment. I just read a quote today. J.J. Abrams was like, not J.J., Ryan Johnson was like, I don't see a problem with it. I don't see a problem with it. Is it weird? A little bit. Did I think Leia was going to die at that moment because Carrie had passed away at that point? Would it have made sense to do that? Probably. That might have been the right moment to let her go. It's unfortunate, but I hate to say it that way. It sounds so heartless. Because she just came back and she really didn't do much for the rest of the movie. But the Mary Poppins moment doesn't. People love to call back to that. I don't care about that.
Guess what? There's precedent. Kanan did it in Rebels. He got sucked out of a ship. He flew back in. It's force power. It's the ability to protect yourself that other people don't have. Pull the force around you. Whatever it is, not that big a deal.
Yep. Snoke's death did not bother me. In fact, Chris Ryans, who may or may not be still with us, I saw him in the chat before. Chris, I agree with Chris. Chris laughed when it happened, and he should, because honestly, it was fantastic. Again, we didn't need Snoke's backstory. We don't need it. We still don't need it. Right. He didn't matter. He was the bad guy. He was the Emperor in the Return of the Jedi. Nobody knew that he was a senator from Naboo that was secretly trying to take over the galaxy. It didn't matter. He was just the Emperor. And I think that's lost on a number of people. But before we get into a little bit more of the controversy, because there's a couple things that we have to hit. We have to hit the fan reaction and Lucasfilm's alleged reaction. Let's take a real quick break. Or Nick, do you want a longer break or do you want a regular break?
Let's do a long break for just a quick second.
We're gonna take a quick long break, and when we come back, we're gonna talk about the controversy from Last Jedi, and then for those of you who have heard me talk about how I have some issues with The Rise of Skywalker, we are going to get into that. But right now, we're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more Sequel Trilogy: The Good, the Bad, and the Controversy.
This is proof right here, guys. If you're watching this, you will not meet nicer people. Whoops, I'm going to point. There and there. You will not meet nicer people.
Coming back to a show that I dearly love and admire. So thanks for having me.
It's like, that's Big Starklighter's helmet. So how did you know? Because I'm a nerd.
I've placed information vital to the survival of the rebellion into the memory systems of this R2 unit.
But, I was doing my research, and Wedge was obviously a character that you had to use if you were going to do Rogue Squadrons.
What are you doing, C-3PO? I'm taking one last look at my friends. These aren't your friends.
Cassie and Jim and the feature, people are like, no. I can literally hear people that are going, no.
It doesn't look like they're even hungry when they get out. They're not just like, did you bring a Snickers or something? There's no logic to it. And then later, we haven't even talked about the Wilford Brimley of it all.
The same thing. Sears never left me again. We're such soulmates that her being older and me being older was exactly where we were meant to be.
Because Darth Vader was the scariest thing that had ever happened to anybody, and this guy literally looks like the devil.
You go to death. There is no trying.
What's the big question people have? Like, what's the thing everybody's wondering about? What's the thing I don't understand? What would I want to hear?
The galaxy isn't growing to push people out. It's growing to let more people come in and find their love so that it's able to continue and create this connective tissue.
It's good to know that people still love it out there, and that the people who made it are all proud and passionate about it and willing to come back.
It was a mess, dude. I had to wear a patch for a bit. We went to see Star Wars that night because I said, no, I'm going. We have to go. And I went to see Star Wars with a huge thing on my eye.
I like to denote people as daddies from time to time. And I believe that you are a certified daddy. Like Pedro Pascal's a daddy. Like, certified daddy.
I have had the best time ever on Around the Galaxy. Thank you so much.
Well, we are back. Thank you for hanging out with us. That was a little bit of a 2-minute break, and we appreciate you hanging with us. This is a long show for us. We are 97 minutes in, give or take, if you don't count the technical difficulties we ran into, and we're only halfway through The Last Jedi. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're hanging out with us, thank you so much. Please keep your comments coming in the chat, because we are, as you can say, we are definitely. We're checking in with you. We want your thoughts on it. If you're watching on Twitter, thank you so much. We, Twitter seems to be the place where people are checking us out, and we love that. The only thing is we can't hear your comments. So head on over to
And we've got to figure that out, because I was helping our friend Greg with his NBA podcast halftime show last night.
Did you figure it out?
And he was able to see the comments. So we've got to figure out how to get our comments so that we can get those in there. So,
we help people, and yet
to be continued.
We have to figure that out. But if you're there, why don't you come on over to youtube.com/@the SSW Network so we can get your comments, so we can hear from you, and keep this conversation going, because we are about to get to, in just a few minutes, The Rise of Skywalker, my 11th favorite live action Star Wars film. And I have some thoughts. I've been holding them on for years, because I don't
for a good long time.
I have. They might explode out. It might be an ugly vomit of thoughts. But we're not done yet with The Last Jedi, because the fact, again, it was the most controversial of all the Star Wars films. And interestingly, so I think one of the biggest things is The Last Jedi became an opportunity for people who are using Star Wars to push a political agenda. Look, and I hate getting into that. I really do. I don't hate calling out the assholes, but I do hate calling it from a political standpoint, because it really is. People who decided to make this more than just a commentary on Star Wars have blamed Kathleen Kennedy, have blamed Rian Johnson and other Lucasfilm employees for coming at them and calling them racist and sexist if they don't like the movie. Nick, as you know, and if you follow me on Twitter, you saw that I literally reached out to both Reddit and the Saltier Than Crate, I guess subreddit.
Which kudos for a great name, by the way.
Fantastic name, but a bunch of assholes who are just angry about Star Wars. And I said, I would love to see proof that Rian Johnson called you sexist and racist. I would love to see proof that Kathleen Kennedy or anybody from Lucasfilm called Star Wars fans sexist and racist. And you know what? Nobody could show me any evidence that was done. What we did find one piece of evidence, and I wish I could remember who it was on Twitter. I apologize. I'm going to screw it up. And if I find it, I'll definitely call you out later. There was one point where Rian Johnson said that he was blocking people who had who came into conversations with a negative point of view, which frankly, I think if you want to have a good social media presence, get rid of that shit. Yep. But so there was this perception, there was this narrative that was created by Star Wars Theory, Geeks and Gamers, The Quartering, all of the people who recognized that during The Last Jedi, they can make money by being negative about Star Wars. They have found a way to monetize a dissatisfaction with the Star Wars trilogy. During The Last Jedi, they did that. They monetized and they amplified a bullshit narrative that Lucasfilm was going after Star Wars fans. And Eric Elliott says it here. They don't need proof. They believe it regardless of reality. And he's 100% right. Somebody told them that Rian Johnson said that if you don't like The Last Jedi, you're a racist or you're a sexist. And the reality is, here's the thing. And I saw this as a comment and I thought it was fantastic. Again, I wish I could say who it was because I can't recall. But they said, listen, if somebody's saying racists aren't allowed here and you get offended, maybe you're the racist, right? Yeah. If somebody says sexists are not allowed at this door and you are not, it's what is it?
Well, and I think this is important to bring up in this conversation. TW had a comment. He said, important note for me, I was in the culture warrior camp right until I saw the vitriol surrounding The Last Jedi. It felt like the mask started to come off, so I had to leave and took a long walk back. And that's something important to note. And that's important to be able to admit, where you were, to see a change, to see the, to recognize, oh, this isn't what I thought it was.
Yep. 100%. And so the challenge here and the problem is this began the culture wars around Star Wars. Mm-hmm. Somehow, and look, if you break it down and if you do the research, which I have done for the last week in preparation for this conversation, what it was an opportunity. It's the ugliest side of social media. It's the ugliest side of YouTube. And Nick, you and I talk about this all the time. Look, our YouTube channel, 1,000+ followers, not huge. Right. Our podcast is where we reach the most people. Which, by the way, if you're not following, please do so. Please click on like, subscribe, share, blah, blah, blah. But they figured out that because The Last Jedi hit during the, I'm going to say the T word, during the Trump administration and the challenges that presented to this country. Again, would love to take a stand. This is not the place for it. If I'm going to fight against politicizing Star Wars, I'm not going to do it here. However, we were in a spot where people were beginning to realize that there was money to be made in politicizing Star Wars. There was money to be made by having a negative attitude, by lighting the fire under the people who, hey, there's a black stormtrooper. There's a female protagonist who she didn't get to train with Yoda, but she somehow is a adept at a lightsaber. Again, as I said before, this is all hindsight problems with The Force Awakens. There is nothing wrong. Show me what Rey did wrong in The Last Jedi. What is wrong with Rey as a character? In fact, if anything, I would almost argue, as much as I love her in The Force Awakens, there are times where she's honestly a little bit annoying in The Last Jedi. She thinks she knows everything. She sounds like those freaking grifters. She thinks she knows everything about Star Wars. She thinks she knows everything about the Force. She thinks she knows what the Jedi are. She doesn't. She needs to be shown. So from that perspective, Rey is probably her weakest in these films. Yes, she moves the rocks, which again, brilliant writing by Rian Johnson, who early in the film says, you believe the Force is basically lifting rocks. And then
what do you think it is?
How does she save the rebellion of the resistance? She lifts some rocks. Brilliant writing. But again, I don't see any of the negativity, the toxicity, the things that are called out about this movie being based in any form of reality other than the fact that somebody is looking for something to be mad at and they feel like they were offended by Rian Johnson and they weren't. And nobody can show me the proof. Nobody can. Look, this is a call. This is a call to anybody watching, anybody listening. I'm even going to clip this out. I'm going to put it over on TikTok. I'm going to put it on a YouTube Shorts. I'm going to put it on Twitter. If you can show me the place where Rian Johnson called you sexist or racist, I want to see it. I need to see it. And I will change my tune and I will understand where you're coming from. But you can't. Show it to me and I will gladly look at it and respond to it.
Yeah. That's 100% it. And it's, what it comes down to is hashtag not my Luke Skywalker.
Right.
That's what it comes down to. People
and
are
why
mad
wasn't it their Luke
the
Skywalker
story they wanted? Same thing with Book of Boba Fett. When Book of Boba Fett came out, everybody wanted Punisher Boba Fett. They wanted him to slaughter a bunch of people and be this cold, mindless killing machine. You think about it, what happened in Boba Fett? He beats the crap out of somebody in the first episode. There's a train heist. Like, he did most of that stuff. But guess what he also did? He had empathy for native species. And he had, there was feelings and there was humanity there. It wasn't 90s Power of the Force figure Luke Skywalker, the one that's jacked up with the muscles and the pecs.
Not He-Man Luke Skywalker, yeah.
It wasn't He-Man Luke Skywalker. It was tactical Luke Skywalker. It was smart, clever Luke Skywalker that went, it doesn't serve me to go up there and get shot in the face. It serves me to project myself across the galaxy, distract you, while the people that are going to win this war can get away.
Frankly, might be a little bit too intelligent for the Jeremys of geeks and gamers of the world. This is, and honestly, and this is the funny thing, as we pointed out before, this picture of Luke standing down. Yeah. The funny thing is, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, there was some fan photo created of Luke holding Kylo Ren's head. That these are the same people like Star Wars Theory who wants to see more murdering of children in Order 66. Right. This is not Star Wars. And I hate to say it. Look, you saw it in the quote at the very beginning of this video. The quote from George Lucas is, I made this for 12-year-olds and I want it to be entertaining. I'm not going to show my son Darth Vader ripping through and murdering children at in Order 66. And also, that's not Star Wars. That's not what it's about. It's implied that horrible things happened. And that's really important. If you're trying to tell the story of fascism and what's wrong with this world, you need to imply the negativity. But God forbid, you do not want to be explicitly showing the horrible things.
That's right. And I think that, it was a controversy in a sense. It was, a time of the outcry started here. It wasn't what we wanted, which is hilarious because what did it say in the trailer? This isn't going to go the way you think. It's almost like you got a warning and you couldn't handle it and it couldn't go any
And you missed it. You missed the warning, right? You chose to ignore
the
it.
warning.
Yep. For sure. So, and I think though that this is the problem, and is that this began the controversy, which plays into Obi-Wan Kenobi. It plays into Mando. It plays into everything Disney Star Wars from this point forward, because people did not get the Star Wars that they wanted. They did not get what they expected. And again, this goes back to the point that I made before. If you don't get the story that you want, that's okay. In fact, it's probably better. If you're in a situation where you're able to predict everything that's going to happen in a movie or television show, why are you watching? Right? So Star Wars gave us this as we came into our next our next level of story. And I think that's what makes that's what made me walk out of it saying, I don't know if I like that, and finally made me come around to say, this is the story that I love. And again, let me just reinforce, Lucasfilm, there is no proof that I can find, and please share with me the proof where Lucasfilm went after fans, because they did not. They did not go after fans. They protected people. They protected decency, good, basic human decency. Kelly Marie Tran, Daisy Ridley, chased off of Instagram after The Last Jedi. That, I don't care if you like a movie or not. Look, I hated The Matrix 2 and 3. Sorry, come at me. But I will never go after the Wachowskis or Carrie-Anne Moss or Keanu Reeves or anybody who was involved in those films, because they didn't do what I wanted them to do. Hey, I walked out of those movies going, wow, I'm disappointed. Okay. You know, it's stories, it's movies, it's what we see. So, Nick, anything to add before we move on to the third and final?
I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, there is so much in The Last Jedi, and we hit on it a little bit earlier on, but the Luke Yoda moment is so cool.
Yeah.
You know, it's another callback to fans like us. You get Yoda, you get a little bit of serious Yoda, but then you get Yoda laughing at Luke because Luke's still, you know, a little bit of a, I'm going to go burn this tree down. Haha, watch this. Lightning. Boom. Here we go.
Right.
But the thing that I have always carried from that, and probably my favorite scene in that entire movie, is what Yoda says about masters. We are what they grow beyond, because that's parenting. I'm a dad to 4 daughters. You're a dad to 2 kids. Like, I've worked, you know, with teenagers for a long part of my career. Like, that's what you want when you're mentoring someone, when you're raising someone, when you're doing, I want them to be better than me. And when I saw that moment in the theater, it was a punch in the gut in the best possible way. I'm like, oh, damn, like Star Wars meeting me at the stage that I am now as a dad, not just the guy who was, when he was younger, all he wanted to see was Luke Skywalker facing down the First Order with a laser sword. I wanted that then. Now I get a version of that, but I also get something that speaks directly to the situation I'm in. And again, the layers of what Rian Johnson put into that story. And, you know, it just goes back to, you know, your comment at the beginning. J.J. Abrams likes making Star Wars movies. Rian Johnson likes Star Wars. Like, there's a noticeable difference in the commitment to that, which makes me hopeful. And I don't know that we're ever going to get it, but I long for the rumored, you know, Rian Johnson trilogy. Like, give him 3 movies and let him develop an entire segment of this. Because when we look at these movies and this sequel trilogy that we're talking about, one of the big picture things that I want to talk about at the end is the change from JJ to Ryan back to JJ, like what that means for a trilogy of movies when you have a shift in vision from one to the next. Like, that's a significant thing too.
For sure. And I think that was one of the challenges of The Rise of Skywalker, which we will get to in just a minute. We're going to take one more break. Then we're going to talk about the final movie of the sequel trilogy as brought to us by Disney. And we're also going to talk a little bit about what this means for the future of Star Wars and the current state of Star Wars moving forward. So we're going to take one last quick break. I say one last. Who knows? Maybe we'll take another break. Who knows how long the next segment's going to go? This is the great thing about doing this live. But we'll be back. Please hang out with us. We're enjoying your company. We have a whole bunch of you with Twitter, a whole bunch of you hanging out with us on our YouTube channel. Thanks for hanging out. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be back with more Sequel Trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Controversy.
General Huggs?
Where are those transmissions, Decepticon?
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first?
A communications disruption can mean only one thing.
Okay, I'll hold.
We are coming up on hour 2 of this, hour 3. We're coming through the end of hour 2 of this conversation about the sequel trilogy. You know, so for those of you who are hanging out with us, you know us from ATG Cast, which is our live Thursday night show where we talk about the news of the week. We usually have a guest and we dig into your comments and conversation, and we're usually done in about an hour 15. Tonight we are hanging out. We're taking this very deep dive. We're recording
in it to win it, baby.
In it to win it. We are recording an episode of Around the Galaxy, which if you're watching this and you missed the beginning and you don't feel like watching us, but you want to listen to us, check out the podcast feed. You can find us on the SSW network, where you can find the podcast feed, and you can download it, or you can connect wherever, whether you do it on Apple Podcasts, what else? Spotify,
all the
whatever.
places.
All the places. Nick, where do you listen to podcasts? I'm just curious.
I use Overcast.
Oh, really? You're the guy. When I look at
I'm the guy. Yep,
okay.
That's me. I'm the Overcast user.
Beta tapes and Overcast. Excellent.
Yes, old school as they come.
Hey, you know, that's fine. So we're talking about all the Star Wars, but tonight we're specifically talking about the Star Wars sequels and the good, the bad, and the controversy. And honestly, and one of the things that we'll talk about at the end is the impact that this is having on Star Wars as we know it today. As we said at the top, Nick and I are old school OG Star Wars fans. I saw it in 1977 as a 7-year-old. Nick was born in 78, and Star Wars has been a part of his life since day one. And we are at episode 9 right now. We have made it to the famous Rise of Skywalker, somehow Palpatine returned movie. Let's talk about this for 1 second. First of all,
let's do it.
It has only a 51 critic score, 51, 86 audience score, and I'll tell you why that's important. I remember. So first of all, think back. Rise of Skywalker came out after the Mandalorian had started.
Right.
So we were in the Disney Plus era of Star Wars. My funny little story about Rise of Skywalker that I always remember and will never forget is we used to go to, when the Star Wars movies were coming out at Christmas every year, we used to go on the Saturday that it would come out with my sister-in-law, my brother-in-law, and their son, and my 2 kids, my wife. And it was sort of a family fun sort of Star Wars day. And then we'd go Christmas shopping and blah, blah, blah. And I remember walking out of Rise of Skywalker with my sister-in-law, who knows less about Star Wars than 92.7% of the world. And as we walked out, her only comment after this film was, I thought there was a baby Yoda in this movie. Right. So that was her perspective. And that's where Star Wars was at that time. We had come off The Last Jedi. In between Last Jedi, Force Awakens, we had also gotten, what else had come out? We'd gotten The Mandalorian. We had gotten Rogue One, which is to some people the best Star Wars movie. That's a whole other conversation for another day. Fantastic movie. And Solo, which to some people the best Star Wars movie. Make Solo 2 happen kind of thing. But this was it. This was the end of the Star Wars saga as we knew it. But a 51 critic score, an 86 audience score, well, where people like me walked out of it saying, how the hell did Palpatine come back? We'll talk about that more in detail in a second. The reality is a lot of people didn't care because they were just normal Star Wars fans.
Correct.
Palpatine is the Thanos of Star Wars, right? The fact that he came back made sense to them. It totally made sense that it worked for them. So some of the common comments and issues that some of us deep lore nerds had didn't hit them the same. But Nick, let me hit you with just a handful of challenges and we'll dig into whichever ones you like. There was the Trevorrow script, which was Trevorrow came and went. They switched up back to J.J. Abrams. Bob Iger was hell-bent on getting this movie out in Christmas
Correct.
of that year. Carrie Fisher had died, and I don't know if you recall, but there was talk that episode 7 was Han's story, episode 8 was Luke's story, and episode 9 was supposed to be Leia's story. On top of that, J.J. Abrams was over-promising nonstop. This is the close of the Star Wars saga. This is 9 movies all concluding in one film. As I said before, I believe Abrams is a fan of Star Wars movies, but not necessarily a great storyteller of Star Wars. And you had another comment about part of the challenge of this movie.
Yeah, I think that Lucasfilm's adherence to trilogies, it was neat and tidy that we had an original trilogy, we had a prequel trilogy. So there was a need to button this up with a sequel trilogy, as it was termed. I think a missed opportunity, something that we talk about as we get farther down the line in some of our notes. I wish that this movie had gotten the Harry Potter treatment. The last book of Harry Potter got turned into 2 movies. I call it the Game of Thrones problem. The last season of Game of Thrones was not as bad as it gets credit for. It just didn't have time to do the things that it did in a shortened amount of episodes. I'm not mad at what happened in this movie. I wish it had had time to cook, as the kids say today. I wish there had been time to split it up and let's get into these stories. Let's get into the Sith Eternal. Let's get into Palpatine and, what's going on, how he got there. Let's get into, Ben's transition with Rey and, all of these things that happen. But for me, when you run through this list of some of these different things, like, the loss of Carrie Fisher was huge. And, I think it's a mixed bag when you look at, did they build a story around the footage they had available as opposed to
100% they did.
Let's skin over somebody like we did for Rogue One.
Yep.
Rogue One worked with Tarkin. Hot take. I think the Tarkin thing worked fine because he was in the shadows. He's on the bridge of the Death Star. Whatever it was, Leia at the end of Rogue One didn't work as well, but that technology continues to develop. It's way different now in Disney Plus and TV than it was at that point.
Sure.
So we built scenes around, you used the quote earlier from Greg Grunberg. This is terrific. You're not going to believe how well this turns out. When she's talking to him, that's the other one I love is when she says, don't tell me what it looks like. Tell me what it is.
Right.
That's a line from Last Jedi.
Yeah, well, I think
that was cut out.
I think you're right. I think it comes down to the let me just play this.
Do me a personal favor. Be optimistic.
Yes, ma'am. This is terrific. You're not going to believe how well this is going to turn out. It's going to be great.
Yeah,
I have to say,
soft. Yeah, go ahead.
Sidebar: knowing Greg Grunberg like we do now, that is the most Greg Grunberg thing I've ever fucking seen in my life. It is so perfectly Greg Grunberg. But I think you're 100% right there. Look, let's combine your comment of adherence to trilogy with Michael Morrissey's comment that this shouldn't have been 7, 8, and 9. Because if you buy into my comment, and I'd love to hear from the chat if you buy it too, if you buy into the comment that they could have ended at episode 8 and then maybe picked up in episode 9, let's call it Star Wars, let's call it Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and then we're done. 2 years later, we pick up with this. You can bring back Palpatine back as the bad guy, but you don't like it. It felt like it was forced to be part 3. The other thing too, Nick, you were saying, and I saw somebody in the chat. I don't know, Nick, if you could pick it up. Somebody said the movie should have been 3 hours.
Yes.
I think that's the problem with the sequels in general.
Yeah, CW says Endgame came out before this. It showed that a 3-hour movie of this kind could have worked. I think this should have been 3 hours.
TW, I love what you're saying. It worked for Endgame. I don't think Star Wars movies should be 3 hours. I think they should be 2:15 and tell that story, go into it, and go away from the trilogies.
And I agree with this, and it's the follow-up. He says, I don't buy it being separate trilogy of trilogy. That's what Star Wars does. Star Wars does trilogies. Sure. I want to come back to that at the end.
But do they?
So I'm with you 100%. I mean, yeah, we also have 2 outlier movies that are not trilogies.
No, but it's just 2 trilogies. It's not like 100 years of trilogies. It's we did 2 trilogies. There was nothing that said other than, and the reason we were tied to this is George Lucas back in 1978 said in an interview somewhere that, yeah, I'd love to do episodes 1, 2, and 3 and 7, 8, and 9 someday. It didn't have to be 7, 8, 9. It could have been 7 and 8, and then 9, 10, 11, and then 12, 13, and then 14. Right. You know, it could have been like, do them as you do them. And yes, I think it trained an entire generation. Honestly, think about that, Nick. I'm thinking about this for the first time.
Another expectation.
I mean, we all expect trilogies. Alien should be a trilogy. Anytime a movie has a sequel,
Back
now
to the
we're
Future,
expecting
Indiana
the trilogy.
Jones. There's
Right.
2 more Indiana Jones, and everybody's going, we could have stopped at Last Crusade. We were set. We were fine. Hey, careful now. There's good stuff.
Hey, I know that's another ATG.
But that's just it. And I think that comes from, I mean, what trilogies did you have realistically before Star Wars? Star Wars, you know, started the thing down the road. You end up with Alien movies. You end up with Godfather.
You know,
right. And most of the 3s are terrible. But you end up, you know, you have Back to the Future. You have Indiana Jones. It did set a precedent. It started a thing, but like it was uniquely Star Wars for it to be trilogies. And there is, you know, there's stuff in numerology about 3s and trinities and, you know, all that kind of stuff. The Matrix, I guess, fast forward way down the line.
Yeah.
But as much as you
2
love
and 3
them,
were a shit show. Yeah.
I'll say as much as you love them. But that's just it. It is, you know, this idea of an adherence to a trilogy. But I think the Carrie Fisher thing, TW said earlier, you know, that's an incredible edit when you see that scene.
Yeah.
You know, you do have soft focus Leia in the front of that scene. You know, the shots that are shot behind her head are mostly Billy, you know, with, you know, a Greg Grunberg facing the camera, or Charlie from Lost facing the camera, or, you know, whoever it is having those moments. But I do feel like the potential for it to limit some of the story based on the footage they had available, which it was a choice.
Yeah.
They chose to say, we're not going to make Leia 2-pocket Coachella. We're not going to do it. We're not going to do, you know, the technology was there. It wasn't great. I actually admire the choice they made, but I also think that does contribute a little bit to some of the handcuffing of the story. You only have so much. It
handcuffed the story and it forced Carrie Fisher into a story. I mean, honestly, look, I would give them a little bit more leeway on this if Carrie had died before or during the filming of the Rise of Skywalker. But unfortunately, and gosh, there's no way to say this without sounding like an ugly asshole, but she had already passed away. They were shoehorning her into this
it was
story.
December of 2016 when she died.
Right.
This movie came out in December of 19 because I was at Celebration in Orlando in 17. She had already passed, and that was when Billy came out and recited the speech from New Hope.
Right.
And, you know,
and Last Jedi dedicated it to the memory of our princess, Carrie Fisher. So, look, I mean, I guess that's a personal choice. Would you have rather had the opening crawl say General Leia died, or have somebody say it in the story, or pull her through? And I mean, honestly, it was wonderful to see her, and it was it tugged at the heartstrings, and it was so great. And Carrie was such a force to be reckoned with, no pun intended. She was Star Wars in so many ways, but JJ let himself be handcuffed by this limitation that came with only being able to use scenes that he shot for his movie, right? So there's a lot of issues with it, and it comes through. TW says, for me, I still think aspects worked. For example, the scene in the ocean moon, Leia calls out to Kylo. I'm not TW. I agree. It worked as well as possible, and
I think there's the other aspect of this that we have talked about a couple of times early on, which is whether you call it the our dad factor, the 90% factor, whatever it is. I watched these movies this weekend over the last 2 days. Just, of course, I've seen them a million times, but I wanted to rewatch them fresh to get ready for tonight. And so I asked one of my 16-year-olds, I asked Lily, the one who's the least interested in Star Wars. I said, hey, watch these movies with you. I'd love to get your feedback. She's familiar. She's seen parts of them as I've watched them off and on over the years. But I concentrated, let's sit down, let's watch these together. And in this movie, she didn't really have the context for what that meant for Carrie Fisher until I explained it. But every time Carrie Fisher came on the screen, she was like, she's so awesome. She's such a badass. Like, those moments spoke to, you know, our dads who love Star Wars were like, that's Princess Leia. I love the scene in Force Awakens when Max von Sydow says, you know, General, to some of us, she's royalty. Like, that's still a thing. Like,
which is why
where that payoff is.
Here's the amazing thing. And I know you know this because you saw the notes, but I think a lot of people will be surprised to learn that the Rise of Skywalker has the highest Rotten Tomatoes audience score since the original trilogy.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That to me is amazing because of my, I'm sure
because
it's starting to leak out, my feelings toward it.
Right.
But because, and this is where, look, I said it in the form of JJ knows how to make a Star Wars story, and Ryan knows how to make a Star Wars movie, and Ryan knows how to make a Star Wars story. The movie going public wants Leia, Han. They got Han as in a dream sequence flashback. They want Luke. They got Force Ghost Luke. They want Lando. They got Lando.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They got Palpatine. They got their Star Wars Thanos, and nobody cared. You and I cared, or at least had an opinion one way or another. I'm not saying positive or negative. We cared because we're nerds. But the reality is, my sister-in-law, who said, isn't there a Baby Yoda in this movie, was just like, oh yeah, of course Palpatine's here. Of course that guy in the cloak and the bad skin is in this movie. It made sense to them. And that's the thing. And that's why I'm frustrated with this movie. Because as much as people like to say it is full of member berries and full of callbacks to Star Wars and nostalgia, it missed so many opportunities for the fans who have invested, right? That's what I'm understanding about the Acolyte, which is coming out. There will be nods to people who have read all the High Republic comics and books and have kept up with the High Republic. There's obviously, we're bringing those characters or that time to life in a new way. And for those that have read that stuff, it's going to be full of, oh my goodness, I can't believe we're seeing that. I feel like in a lot of ways, the Rise of Skywalker missed opportunities to do it for us. And that gets into I know I'm passing the good to get to the bad, and maybe I should wait a little bit, but I think there was just so many missed opportunities with this movie. When people ask me what I think, I mean, I know that Matt's waiting for me to go into my get off my lawn, and I will probably, Matt, and tell me if please, Matt, let me know if I go deep enough into my aggression on this, but there was an ignorance or an ignoring of a lot of the Star Wars lore. But let's get to that in a second. Let's talk about the good things with this movie, because there were good things. And I know, Nick, as you said, of the three, this is your number 2.
It is.
Of the 3, this is my number 4. So, but Nick, why don't you tell me a little bit about some of your favorite things about this movie?
There's a bunch of stuff I love. And this is the deep nerd. This is the push my glasses up on my nose. When we get the Falcon in The Force Awakens, it has the satellite dish on it, and it's not the satellite dish we're expecting. It's the square one, right?
Right. Yep.
It's the square one because what happened to the original round one? It got knocked off
by
Lando
on the Death Star
2.
Yep.
One of the fun things about this, and I learned this, I think, through one of the Art of books, if you look at the square dish that's on top of the Falcon in The Force Awakens, that's the square dish that also matches the square dish that's on the Tantive V4. So the odds are the spare part that is this rebellion cobbling ships together, because we've always said the Empire.
Holy shit!
The Empire has all the shiny new matching everything. The Empire or the rebels are stealing ships and cobbling together a fleet and doing that kind of stuff. So you're fixing and repairing with what you have available. So that square dish, probably from a rebel blockade runner, something along those lines, in the parts yard. Then it gets knocked off. and it gets knocked off in Crate when they're flying through the caves, through the caverns, whatever. So it has to be repaired again. And what does it get repaired with? The round one, to make all of the old ass grumpy people like us happy again. So it comes back to what you're used to. That's a detail that's very, like I said, push my glasses up on my nose, but like it's fun and it hits us in that moment. Like, ooh, that was a thing. I love Rey Skywalker. I'm not going to argue about it. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not going to fight with people about it. I love that choice. I love the choice. She gets to choose who she's going to be. Right. I don't care about Rey Palpatine. I understand why they did it.
Do you understand why they did it? Because I don't. Honestly, I don't.
It gives the why is she so important to him to kill me and take over. It's a bloodline thing. There's a power in the blood, in the whatever. She
didn't have to be the blood though. Like she could have just been an upcoming like threat.
I think you're right, but at the same time, for what they were trying to sell us on, for what they were trying to sell us on. So this good is also going to go with the bad. My bad is I wish she had remained Rey Nobody. I was such a fan of Rey Nobody. You don't have to be a Skywalker or a Palpatine in this galaxy to be important, to have power. So I am wholeheartedly in agreement with you on that. I wish she had remained Rey Nobody. But the fact that she has the agency and the ability to choose who am I going to be, and in that moment she goes, I was trained a little bit by Luke. She has a definite connection with Leia. Found family, which is our favorite, buzzword in Star Wars. Yeah. She found the Skywalkers and went, that's who I am.
Yep.
Kylo telling her, you're nobody. Screw you. I'm Rey Skywalker.
And that's what made Kylo so great in Last Jedi. Was he was trying to beat her up on that one thing that we all knew was so important. I mean, think about that, right? I mean, look, we're grown ass men. We know, we've seen, for better or worse, not even better, for worse, people finding that one thing that hurts and poking it, and that's exactly what he did. He knew that hurt her the most. Now, of course, he didn't know she was a Palpatine because nobody did, because it's a stupid fucking idea.
Except at the same time, when she finds out and she talks to Luke and he's like, yeah, Leia knew. And she's like, wait, that's the bad part. Yeah, Leia knew. We both knew, but we didn't want to tell you.
We knew, but we figured we could just kind of gloss it. What is it? The Obi-Wan Kenobi school of, from a certain point of view.
I mean, I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt your feelings.
Right. No, but I agree. I think like the lightsaber duels in this movie are fantastic. And look, for all the places where J.J. Abrams threw, and I believe this is not him, because he threw lore out the window. TIE fighters with hyperspace capabilities.
But did he though? Because you have in Rebels, you have TIE fighters with shields, you have the TIE Defender, you have Thrawn's pet project. And again, technology evolves. Technology continues to move.
All right. So I'll give you that. I'll give you that. The Wayfinder was clearly a holocron. Call it a fucking holocron.
I can't argue Wayfinder.
Nobody
and
cares.
Holocron. I can't, and I'm not going to try.
But to his credit, or to the credit of those in the story group or whoever who had her fight the way Palpatine fought, with the side saber swipes and that sort of thing, that's brilliant. Because those lightsaber duels in this film are, as much as I love the lightsaber duel in Last Jedi in the throne room, the fight with her and Kylo on the Death Star remains are amazing. I mean, that is incredible. So I'm sorry I cut you off because
that's it. I think the biggest part was, the other thing I had in the good is, and this is, I guess, if we have a hot take category, which we don't really, talking about this being my second favorite. If we're talking about the sequels, and it's funny how you can come up with different ways to rank and categorize and do all that kind of thing. Last Jedi is my favorite of the sequel movies, but if I'm being honest, the most rewatchable is this one. And I know that breaks your heart, and I know that hurts your feelings. There's so much in this movie. It moves. As much as it's crammed together, it moves. This movie does not sit still. It doesn't have time to sit still.
True. This is true.
And jumps. You have crazy ice planet caverns at the beginning with Finn and Poe and Claude. Shout out to
Win
Claude
the
and Eric.
war.
You know, win the war. Bulio. I mean, the whole thing. Like, it starts there. We go to light speed skipping. We end up on the planet. We're doing this thing. We're doing Lando. We're on Pisana. We go from here to here to here. Like, this movie does not give you time to sit still.
This is true.
If you want to watch something that's enjoyable, that's what it does. If you want to sit and think and be in your feels and do that whole thing,
right?
Last Jedi is your guy.
Last Jedi.
Like, that's the way it works. So I said before, I watched this with my 16-year-old Lily. She's not the Star Wars person in my house. That's not me. Her twin sister is, but she was game. I appreciate that she was willing to sit down and watch these with me. And of the three, as we went through this movie, she went, "This is the one I like the most." Like,
see,
this was
86%.
She's the consumer. She's that 90%. And, you know, she, like me, she came to Kylo. Like, as we went through these three movies, she's like, Kylo, like, that's where it's at. You know, the moody emo kid in her was like, Kylo, like, that's the game. But that's where I break down. So what I've said is Last Jedi is Empire, which we've all kind of, you know, in our own ways, you know, gravitated to that. This movie is Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi got these same feelings from people in 1983 that were hardcore about New Hope, were hardcore about Empire. And they're like, what the hell, man? Teddy bears? What is this candy ass, you know, fun-filled romp with comedy and all these things?
Right.
That's what Rise of Skywalker is, man. It's a movie that appeals to the masses and still delivers some points.
That's the amazing thing to me is, and again, this is that really interesting distinction between the freaking Star Wars nerds that you and I are, that spend way too much time on Twitter, that get together, you know, once a week on our live show on Thursday nights to talk about Star Wars news. And sometimes that Star Wars news is, hey, George Lucas is being given an honorary award. That's not news. Nobody cares about that. Yeah. But the average fan, the 90%, the people who are buying Disney Plus subscriptions, loved this horrible movie. And I'm going to say it, it's a horrible movie because it misses so many opportunities. Again, as a Star Wars fan, as somebody who is a fan of the lore, somebody who has invested so much into the Star Wars world, there are so many missed opportunities. And this is my problem with the movie. Look, and Nick, I texted you the other day because in preparation for this, as you did, I watched all three movies. I wanted to give them that next chance. I have to say that because of the Disney Plus shows, because of the lore that they're clearly now building around Palpatine working on cloning and working on dark science and all this other stuff that was said by the guy from Lost, by
Charlie from Lost.
Yes, Pippin, right, from Lord of the Rings. I get that now. And when I watch this movie, God dang it, much like with the prequels, I can't help but take that with me. But you should not need to have done homework to understand this. So when we get to a point of
somehow Palpatine returned,
that is not acceptable. As a writer, as somebody who has literary training, and I know, and I'm waiting for it, and I'll put this up on Twitter as well, and I will get beat up. I don't know how that is an acceptable line in any movie or any story.
Okay.
And I don't care about the book by what's his name? Who's the dude who wrote the I have it here somewhere. I can't remember who it is. Oh, Adam Christopher. I don't care. And it may be a great book. And Adam is a nice enough guy. But I don't care. I shouldn't have to have read that to understand that Lando and Luke looked for Ochi on Pisana. Now, the funny thing is, now that I've watched the movie again after knowing that book exists, I was like, oh, yeah, I heard about that somewhere. But the average fan hasn't, and obviously doesn't care because it's got an 86 Rotten Tomato score.
All right, so let me ask you this question about Palpatine and somehow how he returned.
Right.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
There it is. Is the issue with Captain Exposition there that all you get is a line that says somehow Palpatine returned? Yes, that is your issue. I know that's your issue. That's one of your issues.
Right.
But my question is, how do you feel about Palpatine being the overarching big bad throughout all 9 of these movies, with a culmination in this movie, because I personally am here for it.
Okay.
I love it. It makes sense from the very beginning. This is a guy who's trying to live forever, who's trying to hold on to power. It makes sense that somehow he's going to snake ass his way to the very end and show back up again. You get it in the Battlefront video games with Operation Cinder,
which was
the
designed to make these movies
thing.
make sense. Yep.
Yeah, the hologram thing with his face on it. Like, we get the hologram or the Snoke's in a jar in The Mandalorian. Like, cloning keeps popping up. Cloning's in the prequels. Like, this is a thing. So to me, it makes sense that from episode 1, if we're going chronologically, from 1, where we have, slimy little politician that turns out to be the guy in the hood, to get to the end. Yeah, I've been pulling the strings all along. I'm wholly here for it.
I will say this, and this pains me to say, because it's 100% true. Yes, it makes, and maybe this is why J.J. Abrams was overselling this movie, because he was connecting it all the way back to episode 1. However, he didn't connect it, and that's my problem with it. In episode 7, in episode 8, there's no inkling at all that she's a Palpatine, that he's back. Right? As we go into episode 7, we are all of the understanding, every Star Wars fan, because Disney Plus didn't exist, because we didn't have the Bad Batch stories, because we didn't have the books, we didn't have Adam Christopher's novel. We didn't know that Palpatine was back. And again, look, I am 100% aware of the fact that I tend to make sure that I don't say because of the fact that we didn't know who Palpatine was in episode 6. Didn't matter. That said, you should never, ever, ever have to do homework to understand what's happening in a major motion picture.
Even if it means that it's in Fortnite, something you didn't know existed until like 5 years after.
Exactly. Well, here's the funny thing. My son played that, and he was like, he said, "Oh, there's a Star Wars thing." I was like, "I don't care. It's fucking Fortnite. I'm 50 or whatever I was." But here's the thing, and here's how they could have very easily fixed it. Matthew says, "Pete, just say you damn kids and walk it, and it will."
You damn kids in your Fortnite.
That's true. You damn kids in your Fortnite. A friend of mine made this comment, and this would have been awesome. This would have saved all of it for me. This would have changed my perspective on this movie 100%. At the end of The Last Jedi, they're sitting there on the Falcon. They're dejected. They're lost. They've lost the battle. Nobody's responding to Leia's call for help. And somebody comes in and says, "We're picking up a strange transmission." And it's his Fortnite thing. That, honestly, then going into episode 9 would be like, holy shit, Palpatine's back. But there was no reason for it. To me, again, it feels to me like I feel like my biggest commentary, my biggest critique of the Rise of Skywalker, it is missed opportunities. Chewie's death fake out, that is horrible. That there's no excuse for the Chewie death fake out. You know what? Honestly, they should have killed him. It would have added some gravitas. It would have changed the way we look at Rey's sort of flirtation with the dark side. I'm the spy from Hux. Really? I'm the spy. Like,
but Hux is a goofball. Hux is comic relief. Like,
but here's the problem with JJ started him as the Grand Moff Tarkin of the Force Awakens.
The Hitler screaming speech.
Correct. Which was and you watch that today in today's world. You're like, holy crap. That is some scary stuff happening right there.
We watched that the other night, and literally when it gets to that moment and like the speech is building and he's screaming and he's doing his thing, and then you get the shot of all those troopers and every one of them puts their fist up. She went, "Oh no!" Like right there. Yeah, she got it.
It's like you're doing a documentary about Hitler, and then at the end you see him in clown makeup. It just doesn't work. You're like, oh, we let him off the hook there. The other big problem is well, I'll get to it in a second. Let me finish this Palpatine thought.
Rant away.
I could do this all day. Me and Captain America. It's just that it felt like it came from out of nowhere. As Star Wars fans who are committed to the lore, look, it's as simple as calling the Wayfinder a holocron, right? My dad wouldn't care. He'd be like, "What is that thing? Right. Oh, a holo what? Yeah. I don't care."
Yeah, my dad doesn't know what a holocron or a Wayfinder is.
Correct. To you and me, that'd be like, cool. They called it a holocron. Yeah. That's awesome. Also, just style choices, right? To open the movie with a slow-mo battle with Kylo Ren killing some cool things. I would love to have known more about that. It just felt, and to your point, Nick, it could have been 2 movies. Sure. And I think it should have been 2 movies, just like, by the way, Revenge of the Sith should have been 2 movies.
Yep.
They should have let that story breathe. This story was rushed. And if you ended at episode 8 and came back at episode 9 and 10 to tell the story of somehow Palpatine returned, Pete is the Wayfinder. Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. I think it would have changed things. Because the other thing, and this is my other major problem with this movie, is Rey and Finn. Finn's a Jedi. Lego animation has done more with Jedi Finn than anything we've seen from
so far, but we've got a movie ahead of us.
Correct. However, to leave it out there twice in the final film of a saga and not conclude it.
Well, and there's also
very
bad
about
controversy, and I don't mean to cut you off, but if we're talking about controversy and we're looking at that point, I mean, dude's on the poster with a lightsaber.
Right.
Like, put it in front of us, and then we don't get delivered on it. Like, that one hurts. And I know that's a big one, again, for our friend Chris. It's a big one for us.
And I can live with it in The Force Awakens, because he does use the lightsaber, and you can sort of like slough it off and be like, yeah, he used a lightsaber. Cool.
But that's not where we are.
But the implication in The Rise of Skywalker that he's a Jedi.
Yes.
Twice. And not only does he say it as they're going into the sinking fields of Pisana, but Poe goes and brings it back up again.
Yep. That's the thing you were going to say.
You're right. Oh, we can't talk about it now? Is it on the right to talk about it? Again, great J.J. Abrams direction, because he brought that character, that feel, that sort of lightheartedness, and that it's something that's really special about Star Wars in those character interactions. But it's just such a missed opportunity, and I don't know. And I think the good news is we're fixing it all with the Disney Plus stuff. And maybe we'll take one last break and we'll come back to that. But, you know, Nick, you and I, the first time you were on Around the Galaxy, before we were partners on the show, you and I talked about how Dave Filoni, somebody's going to hate me for this, but Dave Filoni fixed the prequels. He fixed them for me. I watched Clone Wars, and now I watch the prequels with a completely different perspective. And now every Disney Plus show, and you can go all the way from Mandalorian to Boba Fett to, you can even go to Ahsoka. They're fixing the sequels, fixing them for whether you think they need fixing or not. They're connecting them, right? So why don't we get to that? Let's talk about, when we come back from the break, our final section. Let's talk about where Star Wars goes from here. Let's talk about what the Disney Plus shows are doing as a result of the sequels. We are 2.5 hours into the longest ATG ever. And thank you all for hanging out with us. This has been a lot of fun. As you can tell, the checks, the shill checks are on hold again. I'm sure I'm going to go to a break here, Eric. And what's going to happen is we're going to get disconnected. Kathleen Kennedy is going to give me a call and ask us to stop. But we're going to take a real quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into the future of Star Wars. We're going to hit the end of The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, and where we're going from there. If you like this stuff, please make sure to check out our podcast, where we do in-depth interviews with Star Wars celebrities, people in the know on Star Wars, and we get together there. And then, of course, join us on Thursday nights and become a patron. because not only will you get some free swag every now and then, but you'll have early access to all this crazy stuff. But we'll be back in just a moment with more the Star Wars sequel trilogy, the good, the bad, and the controversy. We are back. We have been going for 2 hours and 35 minutes, barring the edits that will come out as a result of the technical difficulties we hit early. But we are having a lot of fun. We're talking about the sequel trilogy, which honestly I think has had more influence on the current state of Star Wars than anything else. And I think one of the things we talk a lot about, or we hear a lot about, is the not my Star Wars. I'm an OT fan, the gatekeeping that comes with that, the negativity that comes with that. And one of the things that's really important to touch base on, and we'll finish our conversation on The Last Jedi, or the Rise. I don't know why I always call it that, because it's the last movie. I think that's the problem.
Do me a personal favor.
So I need to do Leia a personal favor and pull back on that
and get the name right.
And get the name right at the very least. But there's a lot about the sequel trilogy that has been both really good. I mean, we talked about it before. The Force Awakens is a movie that's hard to find fault with, but it's also hard to love, right? It's a good, solid movie. Last Jedi, Nick and I both agree, the best Star Wars story, but maybe one of the hardest ones to watch because it is such a deep, personal, intimate story. And The Rise of Skywalker, which is the top non-original trilogy Rotten Tomatoes score film of the entire Star Wars saga, which blew me away when I found
the people what they want.
Does that surprise you, Nick? What do you think about that? I mean, we didn't really dig
it doesn't surprise me at all. It's exactly what we talk about on so many different levels of being chronically online as Star Wars people, being content creators, spending every day of our life talking about, thinking about, overanalyzing Star Wars. When we've talked many times, when you see the negativity, when you see all the YouTubers and the grifters and the social media people, it starts to feel like, oh, this is dark and this is heavy and this isn't fun. But then you go to Dragon Con or Celebration or San Diego Comic-Con, and guess what you don't find there? Those people. You find 60,000 people at Star Wars Celebration who are literally just excited for Star Wars and get to be together. Big nerd family reunion. That's what this is. This is, there's people out there that can complain and pitch a fit and try to turn it into money on a YouTube channel, or just talk about it because they're not monetized, but they like talking about it. But the reality is, the majority, those 86% or whatever it is on Rotten Tomatoes, are our dads and our 16-year-old daughters and somebody's cousin's wife's uncle's aunt's next door neighbor's dog that went, I went and saw it. It was fine. Cool. I'll like it online. No big deal. It's a Star Wars movie. What do you mean I have to know where that guy came? Oh, I know that guy. He's from the other one. He's the bad guy, right? Like, again, we know bad guys. We see them.
And that's a nice lead into where we're going here and what Disney Plus is doing right now. But before we get that, the last controversial piece that we need to talk about, we would be remiss if we did not discuss Rey Skywalker. Because again, the not my Luke Skywalker nerds, grifters, people making money on YouTube, being angry, have really gone after that as a concept. That, Nick, you and I have talked about this. You and I both know people who have have been either adopted or gone through a very difficult life, and chose who they are. And sometimes that's as simple as a last name selection, right? I mean, think about this. This is where we are in this world right now. Your wife choosing your name is today. It's not a simple choice as perhaps it should not be. You see families, you see people, you see people who are identifying as whoever they are as people. This is a really important moment in Star Wars, and it surprises me, and I'd love your thoughts on it. Does it surprise you that people reacted the way they did to this moment of Rey after an entire trilogy of found family or not having a family choosing to be a Skywalker?
Right. No, it doesn't surprise me at all. And I like what TW says. I feel like it's like a litmus test. I feel like if I can hear someone call Rey Palpatine, unironically, I can pretty much guess their thoughts on the character.
Right.
Agency is such an important thing. You've talked about there are so many real life institutions, versions of, let's say you're adopted by a step parent, you're older and you have the option to choose, do I want to take their last name and be fully adopted, or it's something that they get to do. They get to have a choice, because what that means is they get to say, this is who I am. And we all want to be able to own who we are. We all want to be able to have a voice and be heard from. And I think with Rey, it's one of those things that she's a Palpatine. And Palpatine, there's a stigma. There's a voice. And we see the flashbacks and the footage of her parents and what her parents did to try and protect her. Her dad wasn't like, oh yeah, I get to be, Emperor Jr. He didn't want a part of that, for whatever that relationship and that situation was.
Right.
But she did not have to be stigmatized by what her name was. Your name is not who you are, because we don't get to choose our name. We don't. My last name is Mielke. It's weird. It's German. It's not whatever. If you were like, hey, you get to start your life, pick a name, that's probably not what you'd pick. She had the ability to choose her name and choose who she was going to be with power, which is something that allows her to then chart a course forward. Because if you're going to look at this galaxy where apparently Palpatines and Skywalkers are known by everybody,
right?
This is like Capulets and Montagues or whatever it is,
right?
There's power there. And she said, I'm going to choose the light side.
Yep.
She could have been known as Rey Palpatine, and she could have taken it upon herself to go, you know what? I'm going to rebrand this name in this galaxy. I'm going to show that Palpatines are not all evil dictator, emperor, whatever the hell's. But what she said was, people know the Skywalker name. And that's where my alignment is, because she was also about giving hope, creating the opportunity for being a beacon and being a good person. So I am all about it.
I think I'm with you. I think I think ultimately that's what the entire story is about. If you think about it. So we talked a little bit about how The Last Jedi is the only story that kind of pulls it all back to the first one. And this is a case where if you think about it, Shmi Skywalker is just her name, right? We don't know anything about her history. Maybe we do in comics that you and I haven't read and we're not paying attention. But she was just a nobody in the desert, much like Rey. And she was influenced by the children of this desert dweller, this nobody, Anakin Skywalker. And she was trained by them. And honestly, it makes sense. And unfortunately, again, as I pick on this movie for its various faults, it was telegraphed. It was, yes, I am a meanie. It was telegraphed. It was not a surprise at all. It was honestly, again, weird choices. Because nobody in the galaxy cares about your last name, except in this movie. The only time it's asked is during the Aki Aki festival. Right. The little one, who's played by our good friend Deborah Wilson.
The voice.
But Nobody cares about last names in this galaxy. You got Greedo. You got all these. You just have names. So last name, it's not like in our world. And honestly, like you could be Nick Johnson. I wouldn't freaking care. I mean, just like it doesn't matter. However, so from a storytelling perspective, poor choice. From a story objective perspective, great choice. And I love what that means for the potential future of the Star Wars franchise. Now, one last thing that I'll say about this, and we can get into it a little bit if you'd like. As a result of the simple line of
somehow Palpatine returned,
we have gotten the Mandalorian, we've gotten the Bad Batch, which are directly connected to this issue. The guy from Lost saying dark magic secrets only the Sith knew. Okay, so now we have to tell that story. And as I texted you earlier this week, watching this movie again, after watching The Bad Batch, after learning what we've learned in things like Adam Christopher's book, the story works better. But and I will die on this hill. And if anybody in the chat wants to talk to me about it, if anybody on Twitter wants to talk to me about it, I will gladly talk about it. You should never, ever go to a major motion picture and have to have watched 22 hours of Star Wars on television or read 2 to 3 books to understand what is going on. TWK says, Project Necromancer actually makes me hate Sidious more. Didn't think that was possible. Yeah, you're 100% right, TW. And in fact, much like the prequels, the story means a lot more now than it did before. That said, I'm irritated that we didn't know it before then. I guess the next generation of Star Wars fans will be like,
should have read more
yeah,
comic books.
That makes sense. I should have read more comic books.
Yeah.
I should have read more comic books.
You foolish
Nick, what are your
man.
thoughts
More
on? I
comic
mean,
books
do
for
you feel like Disney Plus is kind of backed into a corner of having to fix this story much? So Filoni is like the fixer, right? Because he fixed the prequels. I'll put the link in this video, but where you and I talked about it, Filoni fixed the prequels. He fixed them. He did. The Clone Wars TV show fixed the prequels. Is he fixing the sequels?
He might, but he doesn't have to, is where I'm coming down on this. I'm saying Star Wars on Disney is an ATM machine. You make it, you put it out there, we're going to pay for it. We're going to continue our Disney Plus subscriptions. Guess what? You don't even have to make new stuff. I'll keep paying to watch the old stuff I've seen a million times.
Whenever I want.
That's because that's how in the tank I am for this. You keep making new stuff, I'm going to watch and consume that too. I haven't read High Republic. I am barely conversant in High Republic other than I see the names of things that my friends online tweet about. I don't know High Republic, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be there on June the 4th watching those first 2 episodes with popcorn and whiskey and all the things I need to enjoy a Star Wars.
Popcorn and whiskey. That's another shirt, TW.
That's right. Popcorn and whiskey. I don't even like popcorn, but I threw it out there anyhow. But that's what I'm going to do. And that's what Star Wars is going to do. Star Wars is going to continue marching forward. And if the choices they make along the way add to, I'm not even going to call it fixing it. I'm going to call it adding to the stories that are already laid out here.
Look at you. Like I say fixing it, you say adding to. That's a really interesting perspective.
If we get to a Janna story somewhere down the line, because we end this movie with these random loose ends that could turn into something else. Lando saying to Janna, "Where are you from?" "I don't know." "Well, let's go find out." Boom. Whole story right there in front of you. We've got a Donald Glover Lando something in front of us. If it's old man Billy D. Lando sitting in front of a microphone recording Calrissian Chronicles, and then you jump cut to younger Lando Donald Glover doing a thing, great.
Let's do that.
And if it also informs the story of how he ended up in Pisana in the tank without a body, rolling around shooting people with a crossbow, great. Let's do that. It adds to the story. It doesn't have to fix the story. We're not required to fix the story. It's a matter of what are these stories going forward going to add to it. Are there things I want to see?
I think
100%. I want to see Finn as a Jedi in this Rey New Jedi Order movie.
Yeah.
I want to see some aspect of the conflict. It's early. We're soft selling that movie at this point. We know Daisy's in it. We know that, it's going to be, about the formation of a new Jedi Order, whatever that looks like. Of course, Finn's going to be in it. There's going to be connecting points. It has to happen. But you know what? If it's not, I'm also not going to burn a couch in my damn front yard because it didn't give me the thing that I wanted.
But what you're saying, though, and this is really interesting, is the fact that every Disney Plus show, and this is where we're going from here at this point in the show, it's impacted by the sequels. Again, back to Michael Morrissey saying it could have been it didn't have to be episode 7, 8, 9. It could have been the continuing story of the Star Wars saga. It could have been this, or it could have been that. It was beholden to. And interestingly, if you go back and listen to this 3 hours of rambling that you and I have done, if you go back and listen to it, our biggest complaints are where it doesn't fit to what we expected. It doesn't fit to the Skywalker story that we quote unquote know. And we're in a situation now, as we go into the next level of Star Wars, the new Jedi Order story that will be from Chinoy. I'm gonna screw up her name. So
Charmin Obeid Chinoy.
Charmin Obeid, right? With Daisy Ridley. This is going to move forward. Every Disney Plus story right now is influenced by the sequel trilogy. Is that good or is that not good? Because we're in a world where there are enough people who hate Disney Star Wars, quote unquote, Disney Star Wars, that it may be causing a rift and an issue.
To the people that hate Disney Star Wars because it says Disney Star Wars, go the hell away. I don't care. I don't want to hear from you anymore. Your opinions don't matter. You hate it because there are women in it. You hate it because there are people of color in it. You hate it because it's not Punisher Boba Fett cutting people's heads off and killing more people in Order 66. Your opinion does not matter. It's not valid here. You can go away. We're done. We're moving on. I think when we move outside of the sequel trilogy and the things that are coming, this is what I love about New Jedi Order. We're outside of our skis at this point. We are beyond. Leia's gone. Luke's gone. Han's gone. We've got Chewie. That's what we have left. We have Chewie. We have R2. We have 3PO. We have these characters that are left that can carry the legacy forward, can be a part of the story. I've said a million times, I love the book Ender's Game. There's something in Ender's Game called the Speaker for the Dead. That's what R2-D2 is. R2-D2 was there at the beginning. That scene in Rise where he's there with Leia when she dies, bookends, beginning and end, telling the story, going forward. That's good. That's good news because we get to move beyond the expectations of the old crusty farts like you and me who grew up with it in the 70s and 80s. And we get to go, cool. This laid the entire foundation for everything that we've got up to this point. Where are we going now? I get to buckle up. I get to take my popcorn and whiskey and I get to enjoy it.
And I think, listen, I just recently watched Three Body Problem on Netflix, right? A beautifully done science fiction story. And again, Irving Kershner doesn't call it science fiction. He calls it a fairy tale, which it really, really is. However, storytelling is different. And you and I have talked about this on ATG Live a number of times. In 1977, the rebels were the good guys. In 2024, the rebels are terrorists.
Right.
Are terrorists good guys? Well, in some cases, yes. In some cases, the gray area exists. So as we tell stories today, we need to take into account the change of expectation for who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. Andor is a great example of that. Andor, if you took Rogue One, which is, by the way, the most, if you were to just randomly select 20 Star Wars fans on social media, ask them their favorite Disney era Star Wars movie, it's going to be Rogue One.
That's it.
It's 15 out of 20 times, right?
Yep.
And it's a phenomenal movie. But the fact that it starts with the lead rebel, Cassian Andor, shooting his own guy to make sure they can continue the mission. Wow. Black and white does not exist anymore. And so I don't know how we got here from what we were saying before. However, what it means is, to me, is that storytelling has changed. The expectation of what a story is has changed. And people who want Luke Skywalker as the White Knight coming in and saving the galaxy, they're left in the dust of 1990 and 2000 and 2010. That's a different world now. And everything that Disney Plus is doing, if you think about it, I mean, even Ahsoka is not a clean yes or no, on or off, 1 or 0 Jedi. Ezra, not a simple Jedi. So, and I think that's what's expected of stories now. The expectation is that your story is not a good guy wears white, bad guy wears black. It's not that simple anymore.
It's deeper than that. Art is a product of your time. We see George Lucas writing Star Wars in the early to mid 70s. What is he writing about? He's writing about Nixon. He's writing about Vietnam. He's writing about, all these things that are going on at that time.
The prequels were George Bush.
100%. Right. The prequels are George Bush. You keep coming forward, we get, and it may not be a direct political narrative, but it's narratives of inclusion. It's narratives of going, this is a bigger universe than just a bunch of white guys and the one woman in the entire story. Or by the time you get to Empire, there's one black guy too. We knew that, you knew James Earl Jones was the voice of Darth Vader, but it was a toss up if, you considered that the black character. Okay, there's 2 black characters in Star Wars by the time you get halfway through the first trilogy.
Right.
But it becomes art of any kind, not TV, not movies, paintings, drawings, writing, whatever it is. Art is a reflection of the time that you're in, because the people that are creating that art are a product of the life they live, the circumstances, the environment that they're surrounded by. And so we're going to continue to see that be a part of the stories we get. So we get Andor stories talking about rebellion that reflects real life news and stories that we have going on. You have Ahsoka stories where it's not cut and dry, who's good, who's bad, what's black and white. That's not the world we live in anymore. And part of that comes from the same social media that we both champion and decry. Because you know what we don't have? We don't have a 24-hour news cycle anymore. We have an instantaneous news cycle. It's shoot first and ask questions later. I just want to report the story. Then I'll come back and follow up with facts. And we also get to know the world has shrunk because of that same social media. It used to be, oh crap, we didn't know about the stuff that was going on in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine and Syria and whatever else is happening.
And now, whether we like it or not, we have to address it.
We have to address it, and it has to be right there. So art is going to be the mirror that reflects those kinds of things coming at us. And Star Wars is no different, because the people that write that are human beings that live in our world. They have always done that.
And people don't want to admit that. Star Wars has always reflected our world, and that's difficult for the grifters and the people who are trying to find and trying to bring things back to a negative perspective want to go on. So Nick, let me throw a couple quick fire questions at you, and we can talk about, and then we'll wrap this up. I mean, I think this has been a great conversation. I think I feel much better about my position on the Rise of Skywalker and others. I feel like I've got it out there. I can breathe easy. But
my first question, to finally be able to sleep tonight.
I know I'll sleep like a baby tonight.
Since 2019, you've been waiting.
I've been just dying to share. First question for you is: can the fan base be fixed? Will it come around to Star Wars as it exists today?
This is my Matt. This is for you. This is also my get off my lawn moment. The fan base doesn't have to be fixed. The assholes that are complaining can go the hell away. We don't need you. There's not room for you here. If you can't have fun, if you don't recognize that if you don't like it, nobody's forcing you to watch it. This isn't Clockwork Orange. We don't have little things propping your eyeballs up while you're tied to a chair. It's Star Wars, and it's entertainment, and it's fun. And if you don't like it, please go away. Go find something that makes you happy. It could be Field and Stream magazine. It could be old Bill Dance fishing videos. I don't care what it is. Go somewhere, find the thing that makes you happy, and stop standing here pitching a fit about something you don't like that nobody's forcing you to watch. And
I think I'm gonna start a Bob Ross anti-Bob Ross fandom and just see what happens. What
just
I can do.
pitch a. I hate these damn trees. You know,
happy little trees, my ass.
Yeah. Those trees got to pay bills. Those trees don't get free health care. Fuck those trees. Whatever. That's it.
Yeah.
It's movie. Matt's it. This is it. Matt, my man. Matt from Enid. They're movies. It's TV shows. It's Space Wizards for kids. It's fun. It's enjoyable. This is the thing. We don't have to fix the fandom. The fandom that loves Star Wars, the ones that are fans that enjoy it, they're there. And we see you and we love you and we hope you're hanging out with us. We hope you're hanging out with the other positive Star Wars podcasters that we know that live in this space. Don't give into the clickbait. Look at the sources. Look at, where these stories are coming from. Same thing you do with your news. If it's from CNN, you're probably fine. If it's from East India World America Today, there's probably some questions you need to ask before you read the story. But that's just it. The fandom doesn't need to be fixed. The fandom is there. I think what the fandom needs to do, and this is another great thing from The Rise of Skywalker, the fandom needs to remember there's more of us. Again, that narrative is right there in front of our faces. When you show up with your people have each other's back. We saw it with Podathon. The community comes together, raises money for causes that matter.
Yep.
This is what fandom is. So no, if you're asking me, I don't think the fandom needs to be fixed. I think the dickheads need to go away, but I think the fandom is going to.
But they won't, and I think that's the important.
And they won't, and that's fine. But you know what we can do?
Yep.
We can ignore them. We can tune them out because kind of like a fire that gets oxygen, take it away, that fire is going to eventually die.
See, that's where I slightly disagree with you. Is I don't think the fire will ever die, and that's the problem. And I think it's just a matter of learning how to deal with it. I guess the last question is
Sorry for Matt. Star Wars. Fuck them trees.
Yeah. The last question I think I have, and which will wrap up this conversation, which has gone on for over 3 hours. Thank you everybody for hanging out with us. Those have been with us. Thank you. This has been great. Make sure to join us on Thursday nights, where we do our full ATG live show in about an hour 15 of Star Wars news, guests, and conversation, your comments, etc. Stuff like this, absolutely. But Nick, I think the last question I have is, and I have an answer as well, but I'd love your thoughts first.
No.
How have the Star Wars sequels changed Star Wars forever? Star Wars was done in 1983. It was done again in 2005. How will Star Wars ever be? Where does Star Wars go from here? Maybe that's the question.
Well, and I think that's great because it goes back to one of the questions that I had early on, which is, is there still this adherence to trilogies? We have the Rey movie in front of us. I'm certain that movie is being presented to us as a one-off movie. Great.
I hope so.
The James Mangold beginning of the Force movie, one-off movie. Great. I don't think we have to be married to trilogies. If you give them to me, I'm still going to watch them because I'm that guy. This is Star Wars. What are we talking about? I think Star Wars goes from here into a place that is a continually expanding galaxy, pun intended, because yes, we talk about the galaxy far, far away, but also the galaxy that we are currently in. The opportunity for stories and content is basically limitless.
Yep.
Anything in print, comic books, novels, graphic novels, art books, behind the scenes, all the crap that we love, animation, a world, somebody puts the meme up on Twitter about every other week. If you were able to greenlight anything at Star Wars, what would you do? My answer so far has been a Clone Wars style animated series with the original trilogy cast between Empire through the other side of Return of the Jedi. Give me that style with those characters. What are they up to? Chasing Han, running from Vader. Give me those stories. Movies, great. Make them. I'll go to the theater and I'll watch them. It's about the only thing I go to the theater for anymore.
Yep.
TV shows, make it easy. Put it in my home. What the sequels have done for what Star Wars is coming up is it's continued to show us that if the idiots like you and me aren't super into it, guess what? There's still 86% of rotten people on Rotten Tomatoes who are going to pay that movie and go and watch it. So for right now, that ATM is still printing those dollars. So it's still going to be there, and the merchandise and the theme parks and the tie-ins and all the other things. So my thing is saddle up, let's ride.
I think it ultimately comes down to the fact that Star Wars had maxed out its universe in 1983 at the end of Return of the Jedi. We thought that was it. Yep. It then expanded. It grew a ring, if you will, sort of like on a tree, right? With the prequels. And suddenly we had that story. The sequels have now created this additional layer of Star Wars, which, whether you, again, you don't have to like the sequels. If you don't like the sequels, then don't watch Disney Plus and shut the hell up. Right. Like, because the sequels and the Disney era of Star Wars are its own thing, and you can watch it or not. I have not liked the Metallica album since Load or Reload.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I don't have to listen to the new one. I don't have to listen. I can still blast Master of Puppets in the car and be completely happy. So I think we're in a situation where if you don't like the current Star Wars, that's fine. But be happy that Star Wars still exists and it's still relevant enough. And you know what? The next Metallica album might be amazing. And Metallica is still touring because of that album. I get to no, I don't love Death Magnetic. I'm sorry, GWK. I do not like that album. But because of that, it's relevant to a new audience, which keeps it going and will keep it going for my children and hopefully my children's children. So Matthew says we should call this episode Not My Star Wars so that we control the trolls. You know what, Matt? I think that's a great idea. I think that's what we'll call this podcast. But we are coming to the end of this conversation about the sequels. We've spoken for over 3 hours. I think this is the longest Around the Galaxy in history. We've been doing this for a show for 5 years, and I've had so much fun. And honestly, I could probably talk another 2 or 3 hours. But Nick,
that's right.
Any final comments on the sequel trilogy as we come to the end of this amazing and fun conversation? And to those of you who are watching and listening live, thank you so much. And if you're listening on the replay, thank you so much for hanging out. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share.
Yep.
We have some
leave us a review on iTunes. We'd love for you to do that.
That would be cool. Sure.
Yeah, that would be cool. We haven't had any new reviews.
Leave us a review on iTunes and then send it to @ATGcast. Then we'll send you something. I got some cool stickers here ready to go.
Prizes we can send.
Sure.
Final thoughts. My final thought is Star Wars is good. Check it out. Watch these movies. These movies are great. All 3 of them. And despite the problems that Pete has with Rise, it's the most rewatchable of the 3. I'm being honest. It moves. It's enjoyable. There is good stuff in there. Yes, you can nitpick things apart. We all can. That's a part of the deal. But it's good storytelling, even if it's not exactly the story we wanted, even if it's not exactly the storyteller we wanted. Because, yes, I want Rian Johnson to do all 3. One of my biggest critiques of the sequel trilogy is I wish that we had had a singular voice that created these 3 movies. We didn't. I can't change that. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to enjoy it. And if it's not my thing, I won't watch it. Tried to watch Resistance 3 times. Made it through the 2nd episode 3 times. Haven't watched any more. It's just not my thing. I think not mad about it. It's just not my thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things that was great for me to go back and look at this was it forced me to go back and look at Rise of Skywalker and understand that more than Force Awakens and more than The Last Jedi, Rise of Skywalker is driving the content that we're getting on Disney Plus right now, and the content that we'll probably get for the next several years, so that we can, you know, give an answer to J.J. Abrams' really oversimplified, childish.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
We will be doing that for the next several years. But you know what? I think this time, 3 years from now, 2 years from now, it will all make sense. And I think we'll be very happy with what we have. But everybody who hung out with us tonight, thank you so much. This has been over 3 hours of just, I feel like therapy. I feel like I'm good. I feel like I'm finally ready to move on. I'm ready for the Rey movie. I'm ready for the Acolyte. I'm ready for whatever comes down the pike. Make sure to join us on Thursday nights for all the Star Wars news, your comments and conversation, your phone calls at 504-321-1301. What is it? What's the number?
1501.
Is it? Okay.
You were right there.
I was right. I was very close.
Hi, I'm holding for General Hugs.
So leave a message, come back to us, and we will see you on Thursday nights with all the latest Star Wars news and information. Nick, thank you so much for doing this with me. This was a lot of fun. I feel like
so much fun.
Talking about the sequels has been something we've wanted to do for a while. And again, there's this weird sort of, I don't know, it's like you have to be sort of mindful of what you say because of the way social media is. But I think this is, and again, it's at the end of really, you've heard my feelings on Rise of Skywalker, on all three movies. If you disagree with me, that's awesome. I am surprised that such a high percentage love Rise of Skywalker as their favorite movie, but I'm so happy that they are here and that they are part of this
makes me happy for you.
And so we're in good shape there. So Nick, I will wrap this up by saying, as I always do, may the Force be with you.
Always.
Just one more round, friend, then homeward bound, friend. Don't forget me in your dreams. Just one more song, friend, and then so long, friend. The nights get shorter, it seems. Just one more rhyme, friend. Yes, it's a crime, friend. But you know time, friend. Time can fly. So it's good night, friend. Good night, but not goodbye.